Hey, if you're watching, maybe drop a like and subscribe. And let me know where you're listening from tonight and what time it is for you. For me, it's well past midnight. Rain taps the side window of this old rental, a steady, insistent rhythm against the glass. You've been trying to settle in, despite the unfamiliar quiet broken only by the downpour. This place, nestled deep in the woods, felt charming during the day, all rustic beams and the smell of pine. But now, in the pitch black, it feels larger, less known. You were almost drifting off, that deep, heavy kind of sleep that comes from a long drive, when it happened. Not the rain, that was just background hum. This was something else, a faint scuttling sound from directly above you. You froze, breath held tight in your chest. The sound was distinct, a sort of dragging whisper against wood, followed by a light thud. It couldn't be the wind, not inside, not like that. Your eyes, now wide open, strained against the darkness of the bedroom ceiling. You rationalized it immediately. Old house. Animals in the attic. Squirrels, perhaps, seeking shelter from the storm. It's a rental, after all. These things happen. You told yourself to relax, to let the sound fade into the symphony of the storm, but it didn't. Instead, a softer, almost rhythmic pattering began, a strange counterpoint to the rain outside. Not heavy footsteps, more like something being moved, or perhaps someone lightly tapping a finger against a surface, then dragging it. A slow, deliberate sweep. A chill, not from the open window, prickled your skin. You pushed back the duvet, the cool air hitting your bare arm. The digital clock on your phone glowed 1:37 a.m. Still early enough in the night for things to feel profound and unsettling. You swung your legs out of bed, the wooden floor cold beneath your bare feet. The rain seemed to intensify as you stood, a sudden drumming on the roof, as if mirroring the frantic pulse now thrumming in your ears. The attic access was in the hallway, a simple pull-down ladder behind a discreet hatch. You made your way there, moving slowly, carefully, trying not to make a sound that might disturb whatever was up there. The air in the hallway was cooler, carrying a faint, musty scent, like old paper and damp plaster. As you approached the hatch, the soft, rhythmic sound seemed to amplify, now clearly above you, directly in the middle of the ceiling. It sounded less like an animal scuttling, and more like something organizing, shifting things. You stopped just short of the hatch, your gaze fixed on the perfectly ordinary white square. For a long moment, there was nothing but the relentless drum of the rain. Then, a low, drawn-out creak, like heavy wood groaning under pressure, came from above. It wasn't the house settling. It was too singular, too deliberate. It was the sound of a floorboard, taking weight. You instinctively took a step back, bumping your hip against the hallway wall. The sound from above stopped. Silence, save for the rain. That particular silence, the kind that feels heavier than any noise, stretched and filled the space around you. You stood there, breathing shallow, listening. A minute passed. 2. The rain outside began to lessen, softening to a steady drizzle. You swallowed, your throat dry. Your mind raced through possibilities. Old pipes, faulty wiring, branches scraping the roof. But none of them quite fit the methodical rhythm, the deliberate creak. It felt less like random occurrence and more like an active presence. You slowly retreated, backing into the living room, your eyes never leaving the hallway ceiling. You glanced at the front door, sturdy and locked, then moved towards the back, checking the deadbolt, pressing your palm against the wood. Secure. All windows were closed, latched. There were no lights on in the neighboring house, which felt miles away tonight. You picked up your phone, the bright screen, a small comfort. The rain had lessened to a soft, consistent drizzle by morning, clinging to the branches outside the window like fine mist. You hadn't truly slept after the sounds from the attic, instead drifting in and out of a restless, light slumber, hyper-aware of every creak and groan of the old house. The lingering image of that untouched attic hatch, combined with the deliberate thuds and whispers from above, had burrowed deep, leaving a cold knot in your stomach. With the first hint of gray light filtering through the clouds, you finally pushed yourself out of bed. The coffee machine was a welcome whir, a familiar sound in an unfamiliar place. Still, the quiet felt different today, punctuated by the rhythmic drip from the eaves and the distant sigh of wind through the sodden trees. You decided a walk around the property might help shake off the unease, a way to reclaim some sense of control, to see the place in the sober light of day, even a cloudy one. Pulling on a light jacket, you stepped out onto the front porch. The air was cool and damp, carrying the rich, earthy smell of wet soil and pine needles. The gravel crunched softly under your sneakers as you walked along the side of the house, heading towards the back. You noted the way the gutters overflowed in a few spots, creating small puddles, and the dark, slick sheen on the clapboard siding. Everything looked normal, just an old rental weathering a long night of rain. Then you reached the back porch. It was a simple, covered deck, leading to a small, overgrown yard that vanished quickly into thick woods. And there it was. Leaning against the back door, right beside the handle, was a shovel. Not one of those old, rusty, forgotten garden tools that might naturally reside in a shed. This was a relatively new shovel, its metal blade glinting faintly even in the dim light. What made your breath catch, though, was the earth clinging to its edge. Fresh, dark mud, still wet, as if it had been used very recently. You stopped dead in your tracks, a sudden wave of ice washing over you. The back door, you remembered checking it last night, double-locked. You stared at the shovel, then at the door, then back at the shovel. It was leaning there, angled, slightly, almost as if someone had just propped it up, meaning to come back for it. But who? And why? This house was isolated. Your car was the only one on the long, winding dirt road leading here. The sound of the drizzle seemed to amplify, each drop a tiny hammer against the leaves. Your eyes scanned the small patch of yard, then the dense tree line beyond. There were no fresh footprints visible in the wet grass, or if there were, the rain had already smoothed them away. You took a tentative step onto the porch, reaching out a hesitant hand towards the door. The wood felt cold, solid. The locks were still secure. You didn't touch the shovel. You just looked at it. This mundane, common tool, now imbued with an unsettling, specific dread. Its presence here, in this way, felt less like an oversight and more like a deliberate statement, or perhaps a sign of interrupted activity. The thought that someone had been out here, in the dark, in the rain, with this shovel, while you were inside, listening to noises above you, was chilling. You slowly backed away, your gaze still fixed on the muddy tool. The simple act of checking the perimeter had revealed something profoundly unsettling. It makes you wonder how quickly the familiar comfort of a secure space can be shattered by a single, misplaced object. What else could a person overlook in the quiet of a long night, when the only sound is the rain? The sway of that solitary swing had been the last straw, pushing you past simple unease into a cold, profound fear. The abandoned gas station offered no comfort, only the illusion of shelter, its skeletal structure offering little respite from the biting cold and the pervasive drizzle. But the thought of turning back, of facing the endless winding road swallowed by the fog, or, worse, the dark, silent house where your car lay dead, was impossible. You had pushed open the warped, creaking door to the gas station, the sound a low, grating groan in the oppressive quiet, and stepped inside. The air within was stagnant, thick with the smell of dust, mildew, and something faintly metallic. Old oil, perhaps, or rusting metal. It was marginally drier than outside, but colder, somehow, a chill that sank deep into your bones. The windows were opaque with grime and condensation, admitting only a murky, diffused gray light that barely fought back the encroaching night. Your eyes strained in the gloom, trying to discern shapes in the cluttered, forgotten space. Overturned shelves, a rusted cash register, faded promotional posters peeling from the walls. Everything spoke of a hurried departure, of lives abruptly ceased. Your useless phone felt even heavier in your pocket now, a dead weight in a dead place. You found a relatively clear spot against a wall, away from the broken front window, and slid down, wrapping your arms around yourself, trying to conserve some warmth. The drizzle continued outside, a constant, whispering drum against the tin roof, accompanied by the low, mournful sigh of the wind sifting through the gaps in the dilapidated building. Each gust made the old structure creak and groan, sounds that were natural for an abandoned place, yet still set your teeth on edge, twisting every creak into a potential threat. You listened, straining your ears over the weather, for anything else, any sound that didn't belong. Hours crawled by in this suffocating stillness. The last remnants of daylight faded entirely, plunging the gas station into near-complete darkness, broken only by the dim, ghostly glow filtering through the grimy windows from the lonely streetlight outside. The light, however, didn't reach your hidden corner. You felt utterly submerged in the cold, the damp, and the silence. Your muscles ached from the cold, your mind a relentless churn of what-ifs. You longed for the warmth of the rental, despite its secrets, but the dead car and the unsettling headlights had severed that connection. Then it came, a sudden sharp tap against glass, your breath caught in your throat, your body rigid. It wasn't the wind. It was too singular, too distinct. A solid tap as if something small had been thrown, or casually knocked, against one of the large, grimy front windows. The sound echoed in the stillness for a split second, then vanished, swallowed by the continuing drone of the rain and wind. You held completely still, every nerve on edge, your heart thundering against your ribs. You strained your ears, listening, trying to locate the source, but there was nothing. Only the incessant patter, the mournful wind. You waited, your eyes wide in the impenetrable gloom, scanning the vague outlines of the windows. A minute passed. 2. You started to tell yourself it was just a branch, or a loose piece of debris carried by the wind. A trick of the acoustics in this cavernous, empty space. You were just about to let out a shaky breath, to relax the tension coiling in your shoulders, when it happened again. Cunty tap. Tap. Asterix. 2 distinct, deliberate impacts. And this time, a faint clink followed the sound. Unmistakable. A rock. Something hard. Small. Against the thick glass of one of the front windows. It wasn't forceful enough to break it, but it was firm, intentional. And it was coming from Tom and How outside. You pressed yourself further against the cold, dusty wall, trying to disappear into the shadows. The sharp tap-tap clink against the window had snapped every nerve in your body to attention, a primal alarm blaring through the exhaustion and cold. You were pressed against the grimy wall of the abandoned gas station, your breath held, straining to see past the opaque glass into the swirling fog outside. The distant hum of the streetlight and the soft patter of the drizzle were the only sounds, mocking you with their indifference. There was no movement, no other sound, just an impenetrable, watchful silence pressing in from beyond the pain. Your heart hammered, a frantic, desperate rhythm against your ribs. Every rational part of your mind was screaming for an explanation. A branch, a gust of wind, a piece of ice loosened from the roof. But the distinct, deliberate nature of the sound, the undeniable clink of a small stone against glass, shattered any pretense of natural cause. This was intentional. Someone, or something, was out there, in the fog, in the rain, at this abandoned place, and it was trying to get your attention. Minutes stretched into an eternity. The cold seeped deeper into your bones, but you couldn't move, couldn't even shift your weight. Your eyes were fixed on the vague, dark rectangle of the window, trying to penetrate the gloom, to discern any hint of a shape, a silhouette, anything that would confirm or deny what your instincts were screaming. The fog outside seemed to thicken, pressing against the glass with a palpable weight, blurring the already indistinct world into an endless expanse of gray. The silence that followed the knocks was the most terrifying part. It wasn't just the absence of sound. It was a pregnant, heavy silence, as if whatever was out there was holding its breath, waiting for a response, waiting for you. You wondered if it knew you were inside, if it had seen you come in, or if it had simply been drawn to the faintest sign of life in this forgotten corner of the world. Then, a new sound. So faint at first you almost dismissed it as a trick of the wind. A soft, almost imperceptible scrape against the exterior wall, near the window, but lower down. Not on the glass this time, but against the peeling wood siding, a sound that suggested something slowly, carefully dragging itself along the foundation. It was the sound of a fingernail, or a small, hard object, being drawn across a rough surface. The scrape continued, a slow, deliberate movement that traversed the length of the window, fading as it moved towards the side of the building, then stopping abruptly. The total silence returned, even heavier than before. The drizzle outside seemed to soften to a whisper, almost as if it too was listening. You squeezed your eyes shut for a moment, then opened them again, trying to shake away the horrifying images that were forming in your mind. You reached for your dead phone, clutched it like a weapon. The overwhelming feeling of being watched, of being hunted, was suffocating. There was no escape, no help, no way to even communicate your fear to the outside world. You were utterly, completely alone in this abandoned place, with whatever was outside, patiently waiting. The thought struck you with a chilling clarity. The knocks weren't an attempt to break in. They were a signal, a soft, deliberate invitation. And the silence after the knock wasn't an absence of presence, but a deeper, more chilling form of observation. You wonder if the most profound fear isn't in what reveals itself, but in the calculated, chilling quiet of what hides just out of sight, just beyond the glass, and what its patient silence truly means. The suffocating silence after the distinct, deliberate taps against the gas station window had finally broken your resolve. There was no shelter here, no escape from the unseen presence outside. The cold, damp air was seeping into your very bones, and the encroaching night felt like a physical weight pressing down. Staying was no longer an option. Turning your back on the abandoned station, you stepped out once more into the swirling, impenetrable fog. The drizzle continued, a relentless, chilling kiss on your exposed skin. Your plan was desperate, born of exhaustion, and a primal need for a known, if unsettling, space. You would walk back to the rental property. Maybe the fog had thinned enough for the dead car to be visible, or at least, the house offered walls and a locked door. The long, winding dirt road stretched ahead, a narrow, muddy path swallowed by the gray. Each step was a squelch in the wet earth, each breath a cloud in the frigid air. The silence was absolute, broken only by your ragged breathing and the soft, insistent patter of the rain on the unseen leaves. Minutes felt like hours. Your legs ached, your mind a dull throb of fear and fatigue. The fog seemed to press in closer here, away from the distant streetlight, turning the world into an indistinct blur of gray and darker gray. You pressed on, driven by the sheer desperate hope of finding something familiar. Then, the faint, blurry outline of the rental house finally emerged through the mist, a darker shadow against the less dark gray. It didn't feel like a relief, not exactly, but at least it was a landmark. As you veered off the main driveway, heading towards the back of the property, maybe to check the car one last time, or just out of an instinct to circle, you spotted it. Tucked away almost entirely within the dense tree line, half hidden by a cluster of dripping evergreens, was a small, dilapidated shed. You hadn't noticed it before, or perhaps hadn't registered its significance in the daylight. But now, in the creeping gloom, with the fog weaving its way through the skeletal branches, it stood out. Its wood was dark, warped, blending almost perfectly with the surrounding trees. What made your stomach clench, however, was the door. It wasn't latched, or even closed properly. It was distinctly ajar, perhaps 6 inches wide, revealing a sliver of inky blackness within. The faint breeze, heavy with the smell of wet earth and pine, caused it to swing inward ever so slightly, creating a low, persistent groan, a sound that was far too deliberate to be merely the wind. A fresh wave of dread washed over you, chilling you even more than the cold drizzle. The gap in the door was a silent invitation, a dark maw leading into the unknown. It seemed impossible that the shed had been left like this, exposed to the elements, in a property that was supposedly secured for guests. You stopped, your boots sinking slightly into the soft, muddy ground, your gaze fixed on that dark opening. The faint, rhythmic creak of the door swinging on its rusted hinges was the only sound now, a slow, hypnotic beat in the oppressive silence. You knew, with a terrible certainty, that this shed was not merely neglected. It felt like it was waiting. What kind of truth could be hidden behind such an carelessly opened door, and what did its quiet, swaying invitation truly mean for you, stranded and alone, caught between a silent, watchful house and the unsettling secrets of its forgotten outbuildings? The shed door, ajar by a few unsettling inches, groaned softly on its rusted hinges, a low, rhythmic sigh that echoed in the oppressive quiet of the fog. You stood frozen, your boots sinking slightly into the soft, muddy ground, your gaze fixed on that sliver of impenetrable darkness within the shed. The drizzle continued, a relentless, chilling kiss on your face, blurring the edges of the surrounding pines into indistinct, shadowy giants. Every instinct screamed at you to run, to retreat to the dubious safety of the main house, but a morbid curiosity, mingled with a paralyzing fear, held you captive. The smell of damp wood and decaying earth was strong here, deeper, more primal than in the house itself. You could almost feel the cold seeping from the dark maw of the shed, a tangible presence. You took a hesitant step closer, straining your eyes, trying to pierce the gloom inside, but it was too deep, too absolute, just blackness, vast and unknowable. The rhythmic creak of the door, a slow, hypnotic beat, felt like the pulse of this abandoned corner of the property. You were about to take another cautious step, perhaps to push the door gently wider, when a different sound cut through the drizzle and the creaking hinges. Not from the shed, but from the dense woods directly behind it, perhaps 20 or 30 feet in, a rustling. Not the soft, muffled rustle of wet leaves being stirred by the wind, which would have been natural in this drizzle. This was sharper, crisper, the distinct, almost dry sound of something moving through leaves, a series of deliberate disturbances, almost like shuffling. It was a sound that shouldn't exist in a soaking wet forest, where every fallen leaf would be saturated and heavy. Yet, there it was, unmistakable. Rustle, rustle, scrape. You froze again, every muscle rigid, your breath catching in your throat. Your eyes darted from the dark opening of the shed to the impenetrable wall of fog-shrouded trees behind it. The rustling continued, moving slowly parallel to the back of the shed, steadily advancing deeper into the woods, away from you. It wasn't frantic, not an animal fleeing. It was slow, purposeful, almost meandering. The cold, damp air felt even colder now, prickling your skin with goosebumps. The drizzle, which had been a constant companion, seemed to quieten even further, as if nature itself was holding its breath, listening to that impossible, dry rustle. You stood there, utterly exposed, between the whispering shed door and the unsettling sounds from the woods, your phone a useless weight in your pocket. The knowledge that the house was just yards away, offering its own strange comfort and terror, felt impossibly distant. Then, just as suddenly as it began, the rustling stopped. Complete silence. Only the gentle, persistent patter of the rain, now a mere whisper, and the barely audible creak of the shed door. The abrupt cessation of sound was more terrifying than the noise itself, leaving a profound, waiting stillness in its wake. What kind of presence moves through a sodden, silent forest, leaving behind the sound of dry leaves, and what happens when it decides to stop, just out of sight, and listen to the rain with you? The dense fog and the uncanny rustling in the woods had chased you back to the main house, a frantic retreat from an outside world that felt suddenly, terribly alive with unseen things. The flimsy door of the abandoned gas station offered no true sanctuary, and the shed, with its slightly ajar door, felt like a deliberate lure. Back inside the rental, the air was still cold, permeated by that persistent, earthy smell, and the silence now felt less like peace and more like a heavy, watchful presence. You slammed the front door shut, the echoing thud a desperate attempt to impose order, to seal yourself off from the malevolence outside, then double-locked it with trembling hands. Your useless phone still lay heavy in your pocket, a constant reminder of your severed connection to the outside world. The dead car, a silent hulk in the driveway, cemented your isolation. You needed a plan, something, anything, to regain a sense of control. Your mind raced back to the original car keys, which you had pulled from the ignition before leaving it, thinking you'd try the spare later. You remembered clipping them to your belt loop, a habit, before your desperate walk to the gas station. You patted your hip instinctively, feeling for the familiar jingle of metal. Nothing. A cold dread began to seep through your exhaustion. You patted your other hip, then quickly checked both front pockets of your jacket. Empty. Your heart began to pound, a frantic, desperate rhythm. You remember distinctly, undeniably, clipping them to your belt. You always did. It was a firm, familiar click. You ripped open your duffel bag, tossing clothes aside, rummaging frantically through its contents. No keys. You checked your pants pockets again, more thoroughly this time, pulling them inside out. Still nothing. The house around you seemed to settle deeper into its silence, the only sound now your own ragged breathing, loud and desperate in your ears. The drizzle outside, a steady, whispering presence, seemed to mock your frantic search. You walked quickly back to the car, hoping that in your haste and panic you had simply left them in the ignition, or perhaps dropped them on the seat. The car door was still ajar, the interior a dark, cold void. You fumbled inside, running your hands over the dashboard, under the seats, along the floor mats. Nothing. The car was utterly dark, unresponsive, confirming its complete lifelessness. You stood there for a moment, head bowed, the cold, damp air seeping through your jacket. The full weight of your predicament pressed down on you. Stranded, cut off, and now, without any means of starting the car, even if the battery miraculously revived. This wasn't just losing something. You had placed them. You remembered the distinct click. They were gone. And what was missing wasn't just the keys to the rental house, which you still had on a separate ring, but the key fob for your car, the small plastic remote that operated the central locking, the alarm, and crucially, the immobilizer. It wasn't the whole keyring, just the electronic fob itself, neatly detached from the metal ring where it usually resided with your other car keys. The precision of it was chilling. Not a theft of the entire set, but a surgical removal of the one piece of technology that gave your vehicle any modern function. It felt deliberate, a subtle, almost taunting act. You closed your eyes, picturing the shed door ajar, the muddy shovel, the flickering light, the footsteps in the hall, the phantom headlights, and now, this. Someone had been in your car, or had access to your keys, and had chosen to disable it in the most precise, unsettling way possible. What kind of person or presence takes just the key fob, leaving the physical keys behind, and what does it want you to do when you discover that almost imperceptible, yet devastating act of precision? The shock of the missing key fob, coupled with the dead car, had landed like a physical blow. You stood beside your vehicle, the driver's door still ajar, the cold, damp air seeping into your clothes and chilling you to the bone. The fine drizzle, a constant companion, slicked the roof of the car and blurred the already indistinct outline of the woods beyond. Your useless phone felt like a stone in your pocket, its silence amplifying the heavy quiet that pressed in from all sides. The house, with its unsettling secrets, loomed in the near distance, a dark, unwelcome silhouette in the deepening twilight. You leaned against the cool metal of the car, your forehead pressed against the window, trying to gather your thoughts. Your mind raced, replaying the last few hours, searching for any logical explanation for the missing fob, for the dead battery, for all the strange events that had piled one on top of another since you arrived. It was too much, too many coincidences, too many things out of place. The deliberate, precise removal of the key fob felt like a final, calculated move, leaving you utterly, irrevocably trapped. A shiver, unrelated to the cold, ran down your spine. The silence felt heavier now, charged with an unseen presence. You straightened up, pushing yourself away from the car, and looked towards the house. Its windows were dark, reflecting only the gray, featureless sky and the soft, swirling tendrils of fog that still clung to the trees. There was no movement, no light, nothing to suggest that anything or anyone was there. Yet the feeling of being watched, of being observed, was undeniable, a prickling sensation on the back of your neck. You took a slow, deliberate breath, trying to calm the frantic hammering of your heart. You needed to go back, inside the house, at least to get out of the cold, to reconsider your options. But the thought of re-entering that place, knowing it held secrets, knowing you were no longer truly alone, was almost paralyzing. You made a mental note to check every single lock again, to secure every window, to barricade yourself against whatever malevolence seemed to be seeping from the very foundations of this rental. As you began to turn, to walk towards the front door of the house, your gaze flickered over the car's side mirror. It was slick with moisture, distorting the reflections into watery blurs. But for a split second, in that brief, fleeting moment, you saw something. It wasn't a clear figure, not a distinct face or body. It was an impression. A vague, dark shape, deeper than the shadows, taller than the misty trees, standing utterly still at the very edge of the woods, where the rental property met the untamed wilderness. It was perfectly framed in the wet, shimmering glass, a silent, unmoving sentinel. Its outline seemed to absorb the light, a profound absence in the already dim landscape. It wasn't looking at the car, it was looking at you. Your blood ran cold. You gasped, a small, choked sound that was immediately swallowed by the rain. You ripped your head away from the mirror, spinning around, frantically scanning the tree line, the precise spot where the shape had been. Nothing. Only the dense, dripping evergreens, their branches heavy with moisture, fading into the impenetrable gray of the fog. No movement, no sound, no indication that anything had ever been there. Just the relentless, soft patter of the drizzle, and the oppressive, watchful silence of the woods. You stood there, trembling, your eyes wide and burning, trying to reconcile the vivid image in the mirror with the empty, silent landscape before you. Was it just a trick of light and fog, a phantom born of fear and exhaustion? Or had something truly revealed itself, however briefly, a silent acknowledgement that your presence here was known, and that you were, in this isolated place, truly alone in being observed? The image in the side mirror, that dark, silent silhouette at the edge of the woods, had chased you back into the rental house with a new, chilling certainty. The air inside felt heavy, cold and damp, a stark contrast to the chaotic clamor of your own heart. You slammed the front door shut, the resounding thud echoing ominously in the sudden quiet, and then, with trembling hands, you turned the deadbolt, the satisfying click of fragile shield against the unknown. Every other lock in the house, on every window and door, had to be checked again, a frantic, desperate ritual of re-establishing a boundary that felt irrevocably breached. Your useless phone lay heavy in your pocket, a constant reminder of your profound isolation. The car, a lifeless hulk outside, cemented your entrapment. As night truly began to settle, pressing its heavy gray shroud against the windows, the house became a cavern of shadows, its familiar shapes now indistinct, menacing. You huddled in the living room, trying to keep warm, listening to the incessant, whispering drizzle outside. Every creak of the old house, every sigh of the wind through the eaves, seemed amplified, imbued with a new, unsettling significance, a prelude to something you couldn't quite grasp. Then you heard it, a sound, low and persistent, emanating from within the very fabric of the house. It wasn't the wind, it wasn't the rain. It was a deep, resonant hum, a low thrum that seemed to vibrate from the walls themselves. A sound you hadn't noticed before, or perhaps it hadn't been there. It was almost imperceptible at first, a subtle vibration more felt than heard, like the distant rumble of machinery, or the deep, guttural purr of a sleeping giant. You sat up straighter, straining your ears, trying to locate its source. Was it the refrigerator in the kitchen? The heating system? You walked slowly, carefully, towards the kitchen, your footsteps unnaturally loud on the wooden floor. The hum seemed to grow stronger as you approached the center of the house, then diffuse, becoming no more intense near the fridge or the furnace vents. It wasn't localized. It felt pervasive, humming from every wall, from the floorboards beneath your feet, even from the ceiling above. You pressed your ear against the cool plaster of a wall, directly beneath the hallway where the attic hatch loomed. The hum was undeniably present here, a low, steady vibration against your cheek, almost like a heartbeat or a low-frequency drone. It pulsed slightly, a slow, rhythmic ebb and flow that coincided with no discernible external sound. The drizzle outside, a constant, gentle accompaniment, was now a counterpoint to this internal resonance, highlighting its unnatural persistence. You moved through the house, checking outlets, flicking light switches, trying to find a logical explanation. Every modern appliance seemed to be off, or if on, they emitted their own distinct, familiar sounds. This hum was different. It felt organic, deeply embedded in the structure itself, as if the old house had suddenly found its voice, a guttural, resonant song that spoke of something ancient and unsettling. The thought of the flickering kitchen light, the footsteps in the hall, the shovel, the missing fob, and now this, all coalesced into a chilling certainty. This house was not merely old. It was alive, in some strange, unsettling way. You stood in the center of the living room, surrounded by the pervasive hum, and wondered what kind of entity resonates so deeply within the very bones of a place, and what its silent, steady vibration is trying to communicate to you, a temporary, trapped inhabitant, through its cold, solid walls. The low, persistent hum from the walls had deepened, becoming a constant, unsettling presence that vibrated beneath your fingertips, through the floorboards, and against the very air you breathed. It wasn't a sound you could simply tune out. It was woven into the fabric of the house, a resonant, guttural drone that spoke of something ancient and alive within the old timber and plaster. The drizzle outside continued its soft, unwavering patter, but now it felt distant, secondary to this internal thrum. You were trapped, isolated, and profoundly unnerved, every sense heightened by the missing key fob, the dead car, and the lingering image of that shadow in the side mirror. The house was not just a rental. It was a character, and it was speaking to you. You had retreated to the living room again, huddling on the worn sofa, trying to ignore the pervasive vibration that seemed to emanate from every surface. Your phone, a black rectangle of uselessness, was clutched in your hand, a cold, smooth comfort that offered no real solace. The light from the single lamp you'd switched on cast long, dancing shadows that played tricks on your eyes, turning familiar corners into menacing gaps. The cold, damp air, a constant companion since your arrival, felt particularly heavy tonight. Then, the cold intensified. Not gradually, not subtly, but with a sudden, sharp clarity. A cold draft. A distinct, icy current of air that prickled your bare skin, raising goosebumps on your arms. It wasn't the general chill of a poorly insulated old house. This was a directed draft, an unmistakable gust that seemed to materialize from nowhere, cutting through the stagnant air of the room like a cold knife. You froze, your eyes darting around the living room. All windows were closed, latched, secured. You had checked them yourself, a frantic, paranoid ritual after the incident with the shovel and the boot print. The front door was locked, bolted. There were no open vents in this part of the room, no obvious gaps in the walls or ceiling where such a concentrated blast of frigid air could originate. Yet, it was undeniably there, swirling around your ankles, then rising to tease the hairs on your forearms. It carried a faint, almost metallic scent, a sharp, clean tang that cut through the general mustiness of the old house. You stood up slowly, moving towards the source, or what felt like the source, of the draft. It seemed to be strongest near the hallway, that narrow passage where the attic hatch waited, a silent, ominous presence above. You walked down the hallway, your boots quiet on the wooden floor, the low hum from the walls pulsing around you. The cold draft intensified here, becoming almost biting, making your breath plume faintly in the air. You reached up, feeling along the edge of the attic hatch. The wood was cold, but no colder than the rest of the ceiling. There was no visible gap, no opening, no loose seam. The hatch itself felt solid, unyielding, but the draft, that distinct, icy current, was undeniably emanating from somewhere above it, perhaps seeping from the very gaps between the attic floorboards, or finding its way through the old insulation. It felt less like escaping cold, and more like a focused, icy breath. You stood directly beneath the hatch, shivering, your gaze fixed on the perfectly ordinary white rectangle. The cold air swirled around you, chilling your exposed neck, and in that moment, it felt like more than just a draft. It felt like a subtle acknowledgement, a chilling confirmation that whatever resided above you, whatever had caused those rustling sounds and those methodical footsteps, was now making its presence known in a new, tangible way. You backed away slowly, retreating from the invisible current, and wonder what kind of cold permeates the very fabric of a house, and what an unexplainable icy breath truly means when it finds you, alone and vulnerable, in the heart of its silence. The cold draft from the attic hatch had been a chilling, undeniable confirmation. It was as if the house itself was breathing, and its breath was frigid, metallic. The low hum from the walls continued, a constant, resonant drone that vibrated through your bones, a stark counterpoint to the relentless patter of the drizzle outside. Sleep was impossible. Every shadow seemed to stretch and writhe. Every creak of old timber sounded like a deliberate step, and the pervasive cold felt less like environmental chill and more like an unwelcome presence. You were trapped, your car dead, your phone useless, and the outside world a swirling, impenetrable fog. As the first faint hint of pre-dawn light began to filter through the windows, a gray, watery illumination, you couldn't stand the oppressive stillness inside the house any longer. You needed air, needed to move, needed to break the suffocating hold of the walls and their strange internal hum. With a desperate resolve, you unlocked the front door, the click of the deadbolt echoing loudly in the silence, and stepped out onto the porch. The air was still cold, damp and heavy, with the smell of wet earth and pine, but it was fresh, untainted by the house's unsettling emanations. The fog had thinned slightly, though it still clung to the distant tree lines, turning them into blurred, indistinct shapes. The drizzle had subsided to an almost imperceptible mist, clinging to the needles of the evergreens like dew. The gray, watery light of dawn revealed the world in muted tones, devoid of the sharp contrasts of day or the deep terrors of night. Your car still sat in the driveway, a dark, silent hulk, its windows opaque with condensation. You walked towards it, not with any real hope, but out of a desperate need for something familiar, something that connected you to your previous, untroubled life. You reached the driver's side, your fingers brushing the cold, slick metal. The side mirror, which had shown you that fleeting, terrifying glimpse of a silhouette, was now just a wet, distorted reflection of the gray sky. There was nothing in the woods now, just the silent, dripping trees. You sighed, a deep, shuddering breath, then your eyes scanned the ground around the car, a subconscious search for anything. That's when you saw it. Tucked just under the front bumper, almost entirely hidden by a small cluster of ferns and a patch of tall, wet grass, was a picnic basket. It was an old-fashioned basket, woven from dark wicker, with a hinged lid and a worn leather strap. It looked like something from another era, out of place, perfectly intact, as if it had simply been set down. What made your breath catch, though, was the condition of its contents, visible through a small gap in the wicker weave. There was a checkered red and white cloth peeking out, and on top of it, a single, perfectly preserved, slightly green apple. It looked fresh, firm, as if it had just been plucked, pristine despite the surrounding damp and mud. You knelt slowly, carefully, your boots sinking into the soft, wet earth. The basket was cold to the touch, and surprisingly light. It didn't look like it had been there for long. The mud around it was disturbed, a faint impression of something heavy having rested there, and the grass around it was matted down, but not rotten. It seemed freshly placed. Why would someone leave a picnic basket, with a perfectly good apple, under your car bumper, in the dead of night, in this isolated, rainy place? It felt like another deliberate, unsettling offering. What kind of presence leaves behind such a mundane, yet profoundly out-of-place, object, and what is its quiet, almost domestic gesture trying to convey to you, a stranded and increasingly terrified observer, in the pale, unsettling light of a new, misty dawn? The picnic basket, with its perfectly fresh apple, sat innocently under your car's bumper. It was a mundane object, yet its sudden appearance in this desolate, rain-soaked morning felt profoundly unsettling. The low hum from the house still resonated, a constant, unsettling vibration in the cold, damp air. Your car remained a lifeless hulk, its windows opaque with condensation, its side mirror now reflecting only the endless gray of the sky. Your phone, a dead weight in your pocket, mocked your isolation. You were still trapped between a house that felt alive with unseen presences and a world outside that was shrouded in a thick, chilling mist. You knelt, your boots sinking slightly into the soft, muddy earth, and slowly reached for the basket. Its wicker felt cold and slightly damp beneath your fingertips. You didn't dare open it fully but peered through the gap in the weave at the pristine green apple. It looked so perfect, so out of place, a silent, almost taunting gift, left for you in the heart of this creeping dread. The smell of wet earth and pine was strong, mingling with a faint, clean scent from the apple, a sharp, crisp aroma that felt alien here. You wondered about the muddy shovel, the locket in the pantry, the flickering lights, the footsteps, the missing key fob, and the shadow in the mirror. Each piece felt like a breadcrumb, leading you deeper into an unknown narrative. You stood up, holding the basket, not knowing what else to do with it. Its weight was surprisingly light, but its presence felt incredibly heavy. The drizzle had softened to an almost imperceptible mist, making the world seem hushed, muted, as if holding its breath. The only sounds were the slow drip from the eaves and the distant, mournful sigh of the wind sifting through the sodden pines. Then, a new sound. So faint at first, you almost dismissed it as a trick of the wind or a figment of your overtaxed mind. It was a melody. Distant, ethereal, carried on the damp air. It wasn't a radio, not with the crackle or distortion of a weak signal. This was clearer, somehow. A simple tune, a series of repetitive, almost childlike notes, played on what sounded like a small, perhaps hand-cranked, music box. The melody was sweet, innocent even, yet in this context it was utterly horrifying. It felt profoundly out of place, cutting through the oppressive quiet like a sharp, chilling whisper. You froze, the picnic basket still clutched in your hand, your head cocked, straining to pinpoint the source. The melody seemed to drift from deeper in the woods, perhaps from the direction of the abandoned gas station you had visited last night. Or maybe it was from the back of the rental property, near the shed whose door had been left so casually ajar. The fog still clung to the trees there, turning them into indistinct, menacing shapes, and the sound of dry leaves rustling had been a recent memory. The melody continued, a simple, repetitive phrase, like a forgotten lullaby played on a tinny instrument. It was slow, deliberate, each note hanging in the damp air before fading into the gray. It was a human sound, undeniably so, yet it emanated from a place that had revealed only desolation and silent, watchful presences. This wasn't a warning, not like the knocks at the gas station. This felt more like an invitation, a lure. You stood there, breathing shallow, listening to the impossible music. Your phone was still a useless piece of plastic, unable to call for help, unable to record this haunting, childish tune. The warmth of any modern comfort felt miles away, unreachable. What kind of person, or thing, leaves behind forgotten gifts, and then plays such an innocent, yet profoundly disturbing melody on a cold, foggy morning, drawing you deeper into the quiet secrets of these isolated woods? The persistent drizzle had softened the edge of yesterday's fear, but it hadn't erased it. The muddy shovel on the back porch still sat there, a silent accusation against the morning's attempt at normalcy. You'd tried to ignore it, spending the earlier hours on your laptop, the familiar hum of the device, a small shield against the house's deeper quiet. Now, hunger gnawed, pulling you into the kitchen. The smell of damp wood was faint here, overshadowed by the faint aroma of the coffee you'd brewed earlier. You moved towards the counter, pulling out some bread for toast. The kitchen was bright enough, even under the perpetually gray sky, thanks to a row of track lights above the counter. As you reached for the toaster, one of those lights, the one directly above the sink, gave a sharp, almost imperceptible flicker. You paused, hand still in the air. Probably just old wiring, a common quirk in these older rentals. You shrugged, dismissing it. You put the bread in the toaster, the familiar click echoing a little too loudly in the otherwise silent room. While you waited, you poured yourself some water. As the glass filled, that same light, above the sink, flickered again. This time, it was more pronounced, a quick, almost angry pulse of light and shadow lasting just a fraction of a second. You glanced up, directly at the bulb. It held steady, bright and unwavering. You frowned. You tried to rationalize it again. Maybe the grid was unstable, or a minor surge. You walked over to the adjacent living room, flicking on a lamp. The lamp came on instantly, brightly, without a hint of hesitation. You returned to the kitchen. The toaster popped, startling you with its suddenness. You pulled out the warm toast. As you spread butter, your back to the sink, you caught movement in your peripheral vision. It wasn't a shadow. It was the light itself. A rapid, frantic series of blinks from that one specific bulb, like an eye rapidly opening and closing. You spun around, heart jumping. The light instantly ceased its frantic dance, holding perfectly still, a calm, steady glow. Just for a moment, you thought you saw something else too. Not a person, but a faint, almost translucent ripple in the air, right where the light had been flickering most intensely. You stood there, breathing shallow, a half-buttered piece of toast forgotten in your hand. The light remained steady. The air felt heavy, suddenly thicker around you. You slowly walked closer to the sink, reaching up to touch the light fixture. The plastic was cool to the touch. Nothing seemed loose. No hum, no crackle. You pulled your hand back, a prickling sensation on your skin. The rain outside continued its gentle, unwavering rhythm, a stark contrast to the unsettled stillness inside the kitchen. You felt a distinct sense of being observed, even though you were alone in the house. It wasn't just old wiring or a power surge. This felt deliberate. You wondered if the house itself was trying to tell you something, or if some lingering presence was simply annoyed by your bright, modern attempt at normalcy. Or was it just your mind, still reeling from the events of the previous night, playing tricks on your senses, making the mundane feel menacing? The distant, tinny melody, a haunting lullaby carried on the damp wind, had finally ceased. The silence that followed was immense, heavy, broken only by the incessant drip of water from the eaves and the faint, low hum from within the house. You stood there, the forgotten picnic basket still clutched in your hands, your breath pluming in the cold, damp air. Your car remained a dead hulk in the driveway, your phone useless, and the fog continued to cling to the distant tree lines, turning the world into a muted, unsettling watercolor of grays. The house, with its cold drafts and vibrating walls, now felt like an unwilling accomplice to the strange events unfolding around you. You slowly walked back towards the front door, the basket heavy in your grasp. Every instinct screamed at you to abandon it, but a strange compulsion held it in your hands, an inexplicable connection to the series of unsettling occurrences. The porch felt cold under your boots, slick with rain. You let yourself back into the house, the click of the lock a small, hollow sound in the pervasive quiet. The familiar scent of damp wood and something subtly metallic greeted you, and the low hum of the house vibrated through your very bones. You placed the picnic basket on the kitchen counter, its pristine apple a stark contrast to the growing dread in your heart. The day dragged on in a haze of heightened senses and frayed nerves. You tried to read, to distract yourself, but every shadow danced, every creak echoed, every drop of rain against the window felt like a deliberate tap. The cold draft from the attic hatch remained, a silent, icy acknowledgment of the unseen. The light from the single lamp you'd kept on in the living room now felt insufficient, a small, fragile pool in an ocean of encroaching darkness. As full night descended, painting the outside world in absolute black, the silence of the woods pressed in, broken only by the persistent, soft hiss of the rain, which had begun to fall more steadily again. You were huddled on the sofa, clutching a mug of lukewarm tea, when you heard it. A car. A distinct engine sound, low and steady, approaching slowly on the long, winding dirt road. Not the phantom headlights that had vanished into the woods, but a real, tangible vehicle, its rumble growing steadily louder. A surge of pure, unadulterated relief, sharp and almost painful, shot through you. Help. Someone. Finally. You scrambled to your feet, abandoning the mug, and rushed to the front door. Your hands fumbled with the locks, eager to unlatch them, to open the door to this unexpected salvation. Just as your fingers found the deadbolt, the vehicle pulled into the drive. Its headlights, bright and reassuringly normal, cut through the rain and the lingering mist, illuminating your dead car, then sweeping across the porch. And then it stopped. Directly in front of your house. An older model pickup truck, its engine idling softly, casting long, stark shadows across the wet gravel. The driver's side door opened. A man emerged. He was tall, dressed in a heavy, dark rain slicker, his face obscured by the brim of a wide-brimmed hat. He moved slowly, deliberately, his boots crunching softly on the wet gravel. He carried something in his hand, a long, thin object that was mostly hidden by his body. He paused at the edge of the porch, looking up at the house, his face still in shadow. The rain seemed to intensify slightly around him, a soft, relentless curtain. Then he looked directly at the front door, at you, and he smiled. A slow, unsettling grin that stretched his features, visible even in the dim, watery light cast by the porch light that you had instinctively flipped on. His eyes, though obscured by shadow, seemed to hold a strange, knowing glint. He raised his free hand, not in a wave of greeting, but in a slow, deliberate gesture, and knocked once, softly, against the wooden frame of your front door. The unsettling smile on the stranger's face, illuminated by the frail porch light, had frozen you. His soft, deliberate knock against the doorframe, followed by that lingering, almost caressing scrape, echoed in the heavy quiet between your frantically beating heartbeats. Your hand, poised on the deadbolt, recoiled as if burned. Every instinct screamed at you not to open it. This wasn't help. This was something else. You pressed your back against the solid wood, your eyes fixed on the peephole, your breath held tight in your chest, trying to peer through the rain-streaked glass. The man stood there, motionless, his face still obscured by the hat's brim, but you could feel his gaze, a palpable weight on the other side of the door. The low rumble of his truck's engine was the only sound for a long moment, a distant, guttural purr that vibrated through the floorboards. Then he slowly turned, not towards his truck, but towards the edge of the porch, where the fog and the deepening night consumed the yard. He walked with that same deliberate pace, disappearing into the swirling gray, his dark silhouette swallowed by the mist as completely as the phantom headlights before him. The truck engine idled for another minute, then slowly, quietly, faded away, leaving behind only the relentless, whispering drizzle and the oppressive, watchful silence of the woods. You remained rooted there, hands still against the door, until the last faint echo of the truck was gone. The porch light you'd instinctively flipped on felt like a beacon in the vast darkness, a dangerous invitation. You quickly extinguished it, plunging the porch back into the muted gray of the rain. The house's low hum, a constant, unsettling vibration, seemed to intensify, wrapping around you, reminding you of your isolation, your dead phone, your stranded car. Hours crawled by. You retreated to the living room, a fragile lamp casting small, dancing shadows. Sleep was a distant, unreachable luxury. Every creak of the old house, every sigh of wind, every drip from the eaves, pulled your nerves tighter. The picnic basket sat on the kitchen counter, its perfect apple, a grotesque symbol of normalcy in this nightmare. You kept checking the locks, a desperate, futile ritual, pressing your ear against the cold wood of the front door, listening for anything. But there was nothing, only the rain, a steady, incessant drumbeat against the windows, ushering in the profound darkness of deep night. The digital clock on your phone, still stubbornly black, offered no comfort, but you knew, by the oppressive weight of the silence, by the cold seeping deeper into the house, that it was late. Very late. You were huddled on the sofa, clutching a thin blanket, when it happened. Dr. Ding Dong. The doorbell. Loud, clear, startlingly cheerful, shattering the suffocating silence. It resonated through the entire house, its archaic chime impossibly loud in the dead of night. Your body jolted, a scream catching in your throat. You scrambled to your feet, heart hammering against your ribs, a frantic drumbeat against the sudden, profound silence that followed the chime. You stumbled towards the front door, driven by a primal terror. Your eyes darted to the clock on the wall, dimly illuminated by the distant lamp in the living room. 2:03 a.m. 2 in the morning. Who could possibly be at your door now, after the stranger had gone, after the silence had settled? You pressed your eye to the peephole again, your vision blurry with fear. All you could see was a distorted swirl of rain and impenetrable darkness. The porch light was off. There was no truck, no engine idling, no discernible shadow, just an immense, empty void. You backed away slowly, your hands pressed against your mouth, stifling a whimper. The doorbell had been an unexpected, jarring act, cutting through the carefully constructed wall of silence. It felt like a direct, undeniable challenge. The cheerful howding-dong of the doorbell, echoing through the empty house at 2 a.m., had been a violation, a jarring intrusion that shattered the fragile veneer of security you desperately tried to maintain. You were backed against the hallway wall, heart hammering, eyes wide and fixed on the front door, which now felt less like a barrier and more like a thin veil. The peephole showed nothing but an impenetrable black void, a swirling expanse of rain and darkness, utterly devoid of any physical presence. Your breath plumed in the cold, damp air, and the low, persistent hum from the walls felt less like a mechanical resonance and more like a resonant, living pulse. You stood there for what felt like an eternity, rigid, listening over the relentless patter of the drizzle outside. The silence that followed the doorbell was immense, heavy, pregnant with expectation. You imagined whatever was out there, unseen in the dark, patiently waiting for a response, its presence, a cold, palpable weight, pressing against the other side of the door. The logical part of your mind screamed for an explanation, for a stray animal, a fault in the wiring, a trick of the exhausted mind, but the raw terror coursing through your veins knew better. This was deliberate, this was personal, hours stretched, agonizingly slow. You dared not move from the hallway, not to the living room with its dancing shadows, nor back to the bedroom, which now felt infinitely far away. The cold draft from the attic hatch remained, a silent, icy acknowledgment directly above you. Your phone, a dead weight in your pocket, offered no solace. The only constant was the steady, unwavering drum of the rain against the windows, a relentless rhythm in the profound darkness of the deepest night. Then, as the sky began to show the first faint hint of pre-dawn gray, a new sound began. It wasn't loud, not alarming in the way the doorbell had been. This was soft, subtle, almost musical. A whispering. Not human voices, not exactly, but a complex, almost rhythmic series of low, murmuring sounds, coming from the trees directly outside the house. It started quietly, a faint susurrus asterisk, like a collective conspiratorial intake of breath. Then it grew, just slightly, a soft, undulating chorus of rustles and sighs. It was the sound of the tree branches, swaying and rubbing against each other in the barely there breeze, but it wasn't natural. It was too sustained, too rhythmic, too deliberate. It sounded less like wind, and more like a chorus of low, hushed voices, whispering secrets just beyond the windows, just beyond the reach of your hearing. You moved slowly, carefully, towards the nearest window, one of the tall, narrow ones in the living room. You pressed your face against the cold, condensation-streaked glass, trying to peer into the graying gloom. The fog still clung to the pines, turning their tall forms into indistinct, shifting blurs. The drizzle had lightened to an almost imperceptible mist, but the branches were still dripping, their wet leaves shimmering in the faint light. The whispering seemed to intensify as you approached, a soft, rustling chorus that pulsed and swelled, moving through the canopy. It wasn't menacing, not in a direct way, but it was profoundly unsettling, an intimate, almost intrusive sound that felt deeply personal. It sounded like the trees themselves were exchanging secrets, murmuring ancient tales just outside your walls, their leafy branches weaving patterns in the dim light. You couldn't make out any words, no coherent speech, just that soft, ceaseless susurrus asterisk, a low, resonant sigh that seemed to speak of an infinite forgotten wisdom. You backed away from the window, a cold shiver running through you. The house hummed, the attic exhaled its frigid breath, and now the trees whispered. It felt as though the very landscape around you was stirring, awakening, not in a benevolent way, but with an ancient, knowing presence. The incessant, murmuring chorus of the trees had finally quieted, leaving behind a heavier silence, punctuated only by the relentless drip from the eaves and the low, persistent hum resonating from the very walls of the house. You were still in the hallway, pressed against the cool plaster, your breath pluming in the cold, damp air, your heart a frantic drumbeat against your ribs. The doorbell's cheerful chime at 2 a.m., with no one visible, felt like a distant, cruel memory, but its message, a deliberate intrusion into your solitude, was deeply etched into your mind. Your phone remained a useless black rectangle, a constant reminder of your profound isolation, and your car, a lifeless hulk outside, cemented your entrapment. As the first, faint hint of pre-dawn light, a watery gray, began to filter through the windows, the world outside slowly resolved itself from absolute black to an indistinct blur of muted tones. The fog still clung to the distant tree lines, turning them into blurred, menacing shapes, but the immediate vicinity of the house was a little clearer. The drizzle, a constant companion, had softened to an almost imperceptible mist, clinging to every leaf and branch. You needed to move, to break the suffocating hold of the house, but the thought of stepping outside, into that vast, watchful silence, was almost paralyzing. You moved, slowly, quietly, through the living room, drawn by an uncontrollable urge to peer out, to confirm that the outside world, at least, remained empty and inert. You approached a tall, narrow window that overlooked the overgrown backyard, a space that sloped gently down towards a dense thicket of pines, beyond which an old, dilapidated wire fence loosely marked the property line. The window pane was cold and streaked with condensation, blurring the already muted landscape into an impressionistic painting of grays and muted greens. You pressed your face against the cold glass, straining your eyes, trying to pierce the lingering mist. The faint light revealed the matted, wet grass of the yard, the darker shapes of the trees, and the faint, sagging line of the fence. Everything seemed still, silent, heavy with moisture. The low hum from the walls of the house felt almost comforting now. A known quantity in an unknown world. A deep, guttural thrum that vibrated beneath your fingertips as you leaned against the window frame. Then you saw it. At first you almost dismissed it as a trick of the light, a particularly dense cluster of fog, or an oddly shaped tree stump. But as you focused, willing your eyes to see past the mist and the streaked glass, the shape resolved itself with a chilling clarity. Standing perfectly still, just beyond the sagging wire fence, at the very edge of the woods, was a figure. It was tall, slender, and utterly motionless. Its outline was indistinct, blurred by the distance and the lingering mist, but unmistakably humanoid. It wasn't a shadow. It had depth, a physical presence that absorbed the faint dawn light, appearing as a darker, almost complete absence of illumination against the gray backdrop. It was standing upright, facing directly towards the house, towards you. Its head seemed tilted slightly, as if listening intently, or perhaps observing with an unnerving, patient curiosity. A gasp caught in your throat, a small, choked sound that was swallowed by the house's hum. Your breath plumed white against the cold glass. The drizzle, which had been so soft, suddenly felt like a heavy, insistent downpour, each drop amplifying the frantic hammering of your heart. The figure remained utterly still, a silent, watchful sentinel at the very boundary of the property. It didn't move, didn't wave, didn't make a sound. It just stood there observing, its presence a profound, cold weight that pressed in from beyond the fence. You backed away from the window slowly, your gaze still fixed on the distant shape, until the obscured view finally broke. The silent figure beyond the fence, that tall, motionless sentinel at the edge of the woods, had chased you back inside the rental house with a new, chilling certainty. The air within felt heavy, cold and damp, a stark contrast to the chaotic clamor of your own heart. You slammed the front door shut, the resounding thud echoing ominously in the sudden quiet, and then, with trembling hands, you turned the deadbolt, the satisfying click a fragile shield against the unknown. Every other lock in the house, on every window and door, felt flimsy, easily breached, a desperate ritual of re-establishing a boundary that felt irrevocably shattered. The low, persistent hum from the walls continued, a constant, unsettling pulse that vibrated through your bones, a stark counterpoint to the relentless patter of the drizzle outside. Your phone remained a useless black rectangle, a cold weight in your pocket, amplifying your profound isolation. The car, a lifeless hulk in the driveway, cemented your entrapment. As the sky lightened to a watery, pre-dawn gray, painting the world in muted tones, the house became a cavern of shadows, its familiar shapes now indistinct, menacing. You huddled in the living room, trying to keep warm, listening to the incessant, whispering drizzle outside. Every creak of old timber, every sigh of the wind through the eaves, seemed amplified, imbued with a new, unsettling significance, a prelude to something you couldn't quite grasp. You knew, with a certainty that settled deep into your bones, that the figure had seen you. It had been watching, and the implications of that unwavering gaze, coupled with the previous night's doorbell chime at 2 a.m., left you profoundly, terrifyingly exposed. Sleep was impossible. Every shadow danced. Every drip from the eaves felt like a deliberate tap. The cold draft from the attic hatch remained, a silent, icy acknowledgement of the unseen presence above you. Hours crawled by in a haze of heightened senses and frayed nerves. The first faint light of morning, a gray, watery illumination, began to filter through the windows, cutting through the oppressive gloom. You needed to move, to break the suffocating hold of the house, but the thought of stepping outside, into that vast, watchful silence, was almost paralyzing. Still, a desperate illogical urge to confirm the outside world's inertia, or lack thereof, pulled you to the front door. You pressed your eye to the peephole, your vision blurry with exhaustion and fear. The porch outside was slick with moisture, reflecting the dull gray light of dawn. The drizzle had softened to an almost imperceptible mist, clinging to everything. The worn welcome mat, the dark wood of the porch floor, the vague shapes of the dripping evergreens beyond the drive, all were present. But then your gaze snagged on something else, something that shouldn't be there. Just to the left of the welcome mat, a small cluster of wet leaves, not scattered by the wind, not a natural accumulation. They were clumped together, small pine needles mixed with a few broad, decaying oak leaves, dark and slick with fresh moisture, as if they had just been dropped. They lay there, almost neatly, as if placed. They looked as though someone had walked through the wet, muddy woods, then stood right on your doorstep, paused, and simply shed these few leaves. A cold, sharp shock ran through you. You pulled back from the peephole, your breath catching in your throat. You hadn't opened the door. No one had. Yet here were fresh, wet leaves, directly on your doorstep. The very leaves you'd walked through on your journey back from the dead car. The very leaves that covered the ground beyond the fence where you'd seen the figure. It wasn't just a physical trace. It was an act of quiet, deliberate trespass, a silent message left at your boundary. You pressed your back against the door, the cold wood, a stark contrast to the sudden, burning terror in your chest. The cluster of wet leaves on your doorstep, a silent, chilling message, had confirmed it. Something, or someone, had been here, right outside your boundary, after you had seen the figure beyond the fence, after the doorbell's jarring chime. You were backed against the front door, heart hammering, breath pluming in the cold, damp air. The low, persistent hum from the walls felt less like a mechanical resonance, and more like a guttural, watchful pulse from the very bones of the house. Your phone remained a useless black rectangle, a constant reminder of your profound isolation, and your car, a lifeless hulk in the driveway, cemented your entrapment. As the pre-dawn light, a watery gray, began to strengthen, slowly pushing back the oppressive darkness, the world outside resolved itself into blurred shapes. The fog still clung to the distant tree lines, turning them into indistinct, menacing blurs, but the immediate vicinity of the house was a little clearer. The drizzle had softened to an almost imperceptible mist, clinging to every leaf and branch. You stood there, rigid, listening over the relentless drip from the eaves, trying to absorb the new reality of your breached security. Sleep was impossible. Every shadow danced. Every drip from the eaves felt like a deliberate tap. The cold draft from the attic hatch remained, a silent, icy acknowledgement. You knew, with a certainty that settled deep into your bones, that you were no longer merely staying in a rental. You were an unwelcome guest, observed, manipulated, a subject in a strange, unfolding narrative. You moved slowly, quietly, through the living room, drawn by an uncontrollable urge to peer out again, to confirm that the outside world, at least, remained empty and inert. You approached a tall, narrow window that overlooked the driveway, The same window from which you'd watched the stranger's truck arrive and then vanish. The pane was cold and streaked with condensation, blurring the already muted landscape into an impressionistic painting of grays and muted greens. You pressed your face against the cold glass, straining your eyes, trying to pierce the lingering mist. The faint light revealed the wet gravel of the driveway, the darker shape of your dead car, its windows opaque with moisture. Everything seemed still, silent, heavy with the persistent damp. And then, your gaze snagged on something new, something that definitely wasn't there before. Parked on the very edge of the driveway, almost hidden by the dense, dripping evergreens, was another car. It was an older model sedan, dark blue, perhaps, or black, its paint dull and streaked with rain. It was positioned slightly off the gravel, its tires nestled in the wet grass, as if it had intentionally pulled off the main track to be less visible. Unlike the pickup truck from last night, there were no lights on, no engine idling. It was simply there, silent and still, a dark, unassuming shape, barely distinguishable from the shadows of the surrounding trees in the dim, misty light. It looked like it had been sitting there for a long time, patiently. A sharp, cold jolt ran through you. You pulled back from the window, a small, choked sound escaping your lips. Who was it? Not the rental owner, who had a newer, clearly identifiable vehicle. Not the stranger in the pickup truck, whose vehicle was older and more distinct. This car was different, anonymous, almost generic. And it was positioned with such a peculiar, deliberate stealth. You pressed your back against the cold, damp wall, your heart hammering against your ribs. Your breath plumed in the air. The low hum from the walls of the house felt less like a comforting resonance, and more like a whispered conspiracy. Your dead car, and now this unfamiliar, silent vehicle. The sense of being watched, of being completely vulnerable, intensified, becoming an almost unbearable pressure. The unfamiliar car, parked so discreetly at the edge of the driveway, had cast a fresh, chilling shadow over your already shattered sense of security. You were backed away from the window now, trembling, your breath pluming in the cold, damp air. The low, persistent hum from the walls of the house continued, a deep, resonant thrum that vibrated through your bones, a stark counterpoint to the relentless drip from the eaves. Your phone remained a useless black rectangle, a constant reminder of your profound isolation, and your car, a lifeless hulk, cemented your entrapment. The pre-dawn light had strengthened, a watery gray illumination that revealed the world in muted, unsettling tones. The fog still clung to the distant tree lines, turning them into indistinct, menacing blurs. The drizzle had softened to an almost imperceptible mist, clinging to every leaf and branch, making the world seem hushed, heavy with moisture. You knew, with a certainty that settled deep into your bones, that this house was no longer merely a rental. It was a trap. And you, its unwilling occupant, were being observed, manipulated, drawn deeper into its unsettling narrative. Sleep was impossible. Every shadow danced, every drip from the eaves felt like a deliberate tap. The cold draft from the attic hatch remained, a silent, icy acknowledgement. You moved quietly through the house, a constant, low thrum vibrating beneath your feet, radiating from the walls, a pervasive, almost living presence. You were desperate for something to break this suffocating stillness, a sign of normalcy, anything to counteract the growing dread. Then, you heard it. A faint, irregular scratching sound. It was subtle at first, almost lost beneath the omnipresent hum and the gentle patter of the drizzle. A soft, rhythmic scrape, scrape. Pause, scrape. Your body tensed, every muscle rigid. You held your breath, straining to hear, trying to locate its source. It wasn't coming from the attic this time, and it wasn't the wind. This was a different sound, lower, deeper, almost guttural. You listened intently, your heart hammering against your ribs. The scratching continued, a persistent, unnerving rhythm, coming from beneath your feet, the basement. You hadn't ventured into the basement since arriving. You knew the access was a small, unassuming door in the kitchen, near the back door. It had been latched, closed, just another ignored detail in a house full of them. You moved slowly, carefully, towards the kitchen, your footsteps unnaturally loud on the wooden floor. The scratching grew clearer with each step, morphing from a faint scrape to a more distinct, abrasive shick, shick, as if something with sharp claws or a rough surface was being dragged repeatedly across old concrete or unfinished wood. It felt deliberate, methodical, not the random scurrying of a mouse or the frantic gnawing of a squirrel. This was heavier, more insistent. You reached the basement door. It was a plain, unpainted slab of wood, tucked into a corner. You could feel a faint vibration against your palm, a subtle tremor that matched the low hum of the house. The scratching, undeniably, was coming from directly behind this door, deep within the forgotten space below. The air near the door felt colder, carrying a faint, earthy smell, different from the damp pine of the outside, more like stagnant air and damp soil. You pressed your ear against the cool wood, the cool so now distinct, almost directly on the other side. It sounded like something was trying to dig, or perhaps trying to file something down. With relentless, tireless effort, you instinctively reached for the handle, then recoiled, your hand freezing in the air. What if it wasn't an animal? What if it was the source of all the other strange occurrences, patiently waiting in the dark? The idea of opening that door, of revealing whatever lurked in the cold, unlit depths beneath the house, was terrifying. The relentless, methodical scratching from the basement had filled the kitchen, a chilling counterpoint to the low, persistent hum from the walls and the soft, insistent patter of the drizzle outside. You stood frozen before the plain wooden door, your hand hovering inches from the handle, every muscle rigid with terror. The thought of opening that door, of revealing whatever tireless presence dug in the cold, unlit depths below, was almost paralyzing. Your phone remained a useless black rectangle, a constant reminder of your profound isolation, and your car, a lifeless hulk, cemented your entrapment. The pre-dawn light had strengthened, a watery gray illumination that revealed the world in muted, unsettling tones. The fog still clung to the distant tree lines, turning them into indistinct, menacing blurs. The drizzle had softened to an almost imperceptible mist, clinging to every leaf and branch, making the world seem hushed, heavy with moisture. You knew, with a certainty that settled deep into your bones, that this house was no longer merely a rental. It was a trap, and you, its unwilling occupant, were being observed, manipulated, drawn deeper into its unsettling narrative. You backed away slowly from the basement door, retreating from the relentless shick, shick that echoed from below. You couldn't face it, not yet, not alone. Your mind raced, desperate for a distraction, for any logical explanation, for a thread to pull that might unravel this tangled nightmare. Your eyes scanned the kitchen, the familiar objects now imbued with a strange, unsettling significance. The picnic basket sat on the counter, its pristine apple a grotesque symbol of misplaced normalcy. The small, almost ajar pantry door where you'd found the silver locket pulled at your attention. With trembling hands, you slowly opened the pantry door. The same faint, earthy smell, different from the basement's mustiness, wafted out. The locket lay there, dull silver against the dark cloth, seemingly untouched. You carefully picked it up, its cold metal surprisingly heavy in your palm. It was old, tarnished, but clearly well-loved once. With a hesitant finger, you managed to pry open its clasp. Inside there were two miniature, faded photographs. One, a blurry image of a stern-faced man with intense, shadowed eyes. The other, a young woman, her smile faint, almost sad, her hair swept back from a delicate face, and tucked behind the photographs, folded into a tiny, almost invisible square, was a slip of brittle yellowed paper. Your heart gave a lurch. This was new. You didn't remember seeing it before. With extreme care, you unfolded the tiny slip. It was a single, small piece torn from an old journal, written in a spidery, faded ink, the handwriting slightly uneven, as if penned in haste or distress. You brought it closer to the dim light. The date was barely legible, but the year was clear, 1967. And beneath it, a single short entry. The scratching has started again, from below the house. But it's not the rats. It's too deliberate. She says it's calling to her, a soft, insistent whisper in the earth. I keep sealing the access, but it finds a way. And the dreams, they know her name. They know our names. This place, it wants more than just quiet. You read the words again, your blood running cold. The scratching, from below the house. Not rats. Too deliberate, calling to asterisk her. The words echoed with chilling familiarity, resonating with the very sounds you were hearing now, the very cold that permeated the house, the very hum that vibrated from its walls. This wasn't a forgotten keepsake. It was a warning, a desperate, decades-old entry from someone who had known this place, known its secrets, known its malevolence. You clutched the tiny, brittle paper, its edges sharp against your skin. The faded journal entry, clutched in your trembling hand, was a chilling echo from the past, confirming your deepest fears. The scratching has started again, from below the house. But it's not the rats. It's too deliberate. She says it's calling to her, a soft, insistent whisper in the earth. I keep sealing the access, but it finds a way. The words resonated with terrifying clarity as the rhythmic shick from the basement intensified, a relentless, tireless sound coming from directly beneath the kitchen floor. The low, persistent hum from the walls pulsed around you, and the gentle patter of the drizzle outside felt utterly detached, a distant, indifferent world. You stood in the kitchen, suspended between the undeniable dread of the basement and the chilling revelation of the journal entry. Your phone remained a useless black rectangle, a constant reminder of your profound isolation. The unfamiliar car still sat at the edge of the driveway, a silent, watchful presence in the early morning light. The house, no longer just a rental, was a living, breathing entity, its secrets slowly unraveling around you, pulling you deeper into its malevolent narrative. You carefully refolded the brittle paper, placing it back inside the silver locket, then tucked the locket into your pocket, a small, cold weight against your thigh. The scratching from below seemed to grow louder, more insistent, a relentless, abrasive sound that vibrated through the floorboards. You had to move. Away from the basement, away from the pervasive cold, away from the hum that seemed to echo the journal's warnings. You retreated to the living room, a fragile lamp casting small, dancing shadows, your senses stretched to their breaking point. Every creak of old timber, every sigh of wind, every drip from the eaves, pulled your nerves tighter. The cold draft from the attic hatch remained, a silent, icy acknowledgement. But now, another sound began to emerge, cutting through the basement's scratching and the house's hum. A creaking. Not the general settling of old wood, but a specific, localized sound. From directly above you. You froze, your gaze snapping to the ceiling. The sound was distinct, a slow, deliberate groan of floorboards under weight. It wasn't the rhythmic pattering of the first night, but heavier, more pronounced. Asterisk creak. Pause, creak. It was coming from the floor directly above the living room, precisely where your bedroom was located. The very bedroom you had last slept in, or rather, tried to sleep in, before the attic sounds began. Your heart hammered, a frantic drumbeat against your ribs. The sound was too heavy for an animal, too slow and purposeful for a branch scraping. It was the sound of someone moving, very carefully, very deliberately, across the floorboards directly above your head. The air in the room felt suddenly heavier, colder, the hum from the walls seeming to intensify, almost in response. The relentless scratching from the basement continued, a chilling bass note to the new, unsettling melody of creaking floorboards above. You slowly backed away from the center of the living room, your eyes fixed on the ceiling, trying to pinpoint the exact location of the sound. It seemed to move, subtly, shifting from one spot to another, as if whatever was up there was pacing, or perhaps searching. A profound, icy dread bloomed in your chest. The attic was above the hallway, but this was above the asterisk living room. The main bedroom. It meant whatever was making those sounds was no longer confined to the dusty, forgotten spaces. It was in the living areas. You stood there, rigid, listening to the impossible symphony of sounds, the frantic scratching from below, the low hum from the walls, and now the slow, deliberate creaking of floorboards directly above. You were caught between two distinct, unsettling presences, one digging tirelessly in the darkness, the other moving with unnerving precision directly above you. The rhythmic shick, shick from the basement, a tireless, abrasive sound, vibrated through the floorboards beneath your feet. Above you, from the bedroom, the slow, deliberate asterisk, creak, pause, creak, asterisk of weight shifting on old timber continued, a chilling counterpoint. And beneath it all, the low, persistent hum from the walls pulsed around you, a deep, guttural thrum that felt less like a mechanical resonance and more like a living, resonant pulse from the very bones of the house. The faded journal entry, with its desperate warning about the scratching, was a cold, brittle weight in your pocket, confirming your deepest fears. You were caught in the living room, a fragile lamp casting small, dancing shadows, your senses stretched to their breaking point. Your phone remained a useless black rectangle, a constant reminder of your profound isolation. The unfamiliar car still sat at the edge of the driveway, a silent, watchful presence in the early morning light. The drizzle outside, a steady, whispering presence, felt utterly detached, a distant, indifferent world, as the house pulled you deeper into its malevolent narrative. You paced, agitated, a desperate need to break the suffocating hold of the converging sounds. Your gaze darted from the ceiling, where the creaking continued its slow, methodical progress to the floor, where the basement scratching offered its relentless percussion. The cold draft from the attic hatch lingered in the hallway, a silent, icy acknowledgement. You were a trapped listener in a terrifying symphony, each instrument playing its part in a score of dread. Then, through the cacophony, a new element began to emerge. Faint, almost imperceptible at first, a soft, distant murmur. You stopped dead in your tracks, straining your ears. The murmur was just beneath the surface of the other sounds, a subtle shift in the air, a vibration that felt different from the house's hum. It sounded like voices, muted, indistinct, a low, continuous drone that carried a strange, unsettling quality. You moved slowly, carefully, towards the center of the living room, where a large, ornate cast-iron floor vent sat near the wall. You hadn't noticed it before, or simply dismissed it as a relic of an old heating system. As you approached, the faint murmuring seemed to coalesce, becoming undeniably present. It was coming from the vent. You knelt, your knees aching from the cold floor, and pressed your ear against the cool, dusty metal grill. The voices were clearer now, though still muffled, like a conversation happening in another room, behind several closed doors. They weren't distinct words, no discernible sentences, just the ebb and flow of human speech. A low, continuous hum of conversation, sometimes rising slightly in pitch, sometimes fading to a whisper, but always present. It sounded like 2 or 3 people, their tones low, almost conspiratorial. Your breath caught in your throat, pluming white against the cold metal. Who was speaking, and where? The vent surely led to the floor above, to the bedroom where the creaking had just been. Or perhaps it was a shared duct system, connecting to other, unseen parts of the house. The scratching from the basement, the creaking from above, and now, the muted, secretive voices from within the walls themselves. You pulled back from the vent, an icy prickle on your skin. The voices continued, a soft, unsettling background noise, weaving through the house's hum and the distant scratching. The words from the journal entry resurfaced in your mind. She says it's calling to her, a soft, insistent whisper in the earth. Was this the whisper? A conversation meant for ears other than yours? You stood there, surrounded by the overwhelming reality of multiple presences, each revealing itself in a different, terrifying way. The memory of that kitchen light, flickering with what felt like a deliberate malice, had driven you from the room. You'd retreated to the small living area, trying to immerse yourself in a book, the worn pages a fragile barrier against the unsettling quiet. The drizzle continued outside, a constant gray static against the windows, but inside, the house felt heavy, as if holding its breath. Every creak of old timber, every settling groan, seemed amplified, imbued with a new, unsettling significance. You'd even considered calling the rental agency, but what would you say? My light bulb is acting strangely, and there was a shovel on the porch. It sounded ridiculous, even to you. You were just starting to feel the warmth of the old armchair, the comforting weight of the book in your hands, when it happened. A sound. Not from the attic this time, and not the light. This was different. A soft thump, followed by a faint scrape, coming from the hallway. The very same hallway where the attic hatch loomed. You froze, your muscles tensing, the hairs on the back of your neck standing up. The sound was too precise to be the house settling, too deliberate to be a tree branch brushing the roof. You held your breath, straining to hear over the gentle patter of the rain. Another thump, and then another. A series of soft, slow footsteps. They weren't hurried, not frantic. They were measured, paced, each one echoing subtly on the wooden floorboards of the hallway, moving from the direction of your bedroom, past the attic hatch, and towards the far end of the house, where a linen closet and a small, unused study were located. You felt a cold dread blossom in your chest. You knew you were alone in the house. Your car was the only vehicle on the long, winding driveway. All doors had been checked and rechecked, yet the sound was undeniable. Footsteps. Plausible, heavy steps, but too light for a person, too consistent for an animal. What sounded like a soft, dragging slide followed each checked. Pousse, dozy boer flies, pousse checked, like something being shuffled. Your phone was clutched in your hand, its screen a dark, silent rectangle. You instinctively tightened your grip, the plastic cool against your sweating palm. The footsteps continued, receding slowly. Thump, scrape, thump, scrape. Each sound painted a vivid, terrifying picture in your mind. Something moving down your hallway, just out of sight, just beyond the edge of what you could see from the living room. You debated calling out, but the words caught in your throat. Your voice felt fragile, small, against the immense, silent weight of the house. What if it answered? Then the sound stopped. No final thump, no receding echo, just silence. A sudden, complete cessation that was more terrifying than the noise itself. The rain outside continued its steady fall, a mockery of calm. You could feel your heart hammering against your ribs, a frantic drumbeat in the sudden vacuum. You sat there, rigid, listening to the absolute quiet that had fallen over the hallway. What could possibly be moving through a locked house, in broad daylight, while you were awake, and then simply stop without a trace? It makes you wonder what kind of presence leaves behind such deliberate, unsettling footsteps, and what happens when they finally stand still. The muted, conspiratorial voices from the floor vent had sent a fresh wave of ice through you, confirming the presence of multiple unseen entities within this old house. Below, the rhythmic shick-shick from the basement continued its tireless scratching. Above, the slow, deliberate asterisk creak, pause creak, asterisk of weight shifting on old timber resonated. And beneath it all, the low, persistent hum from the walls pulsed, a deep, guttural thrum that felt less like a mechanical resonance and more like a resonant, living pulse from the very bones of the house. The faded journal entry, its desperate warning clutched in your pocket, and the chilling confirmation of its words, left you suspended in a waking nightmare. You were trapped in the living room, a fragile lamp casting small, dancing shadows, your senses stretched to their breaking point. Your phone remained a useless black rectangle, a constant reminder of your profound isolation. The unfamiliar car still sat at the edge of the driveway, a silent, watchful presence in the early morning light. The drizzle outside, a steady, whispering presence, felt utterly detached, a distant, indifferent world, as the house pulled you deeper into its malevolent narrative. As the morning light strengthened, pushing back the oppressive gloom, you knew you couldn't stay inside any longer, not with the cacophony of unseen presences surrounding you. With a desperate resolve, you unlocked the front door, the click of the deadbolt echoing loudly in the silence, and stepped out onto the porch. The air was still cold, damp, and heavy with the smell of wet earth and pine, but it was fresh, untainted by the house's unsettling emanations. The rhythmic scratching from the basement seemed to fade behind you, muffled by the solid door, but the low hum of the house still vibrated through your bones. The fog had thinned considerably, though it still clung to the distant tree lines, turning them into blurred, indistinct shapes. The drizzle had subsided to an almost imperceptible mist, clinging to the needles of the evergreens like dew. The world was revealed in muted, unsettling tones, devoid of the sharp contrasts of day, yet still heavy with an oppressive quiet. Your car still sat in the driveway, a dark, silent hulk, its windows opaque with condensation. The unfamiliar car, a dark, anonymous sedan, was also still there, parked stealthily at the edge of the woods, a constant, chilling reminder of the unknown watchers. You walked towards your car, not with any real hope, but out of a desperate need to inspect it, to confirm its continued lifelessness, to ground yourself in something tangible, however grim. As you approached the driver's side, your eyes scanning the damp gravel and the matted grass for any new sign, your gaze snagged on something small, bright, and utterly out of place. Tucked between your car's front tire and a small puddle of rainwater, sitting almost deliberately in the middle of the gravel, was a child's toy. It was a small, plastic figurine, bright yellow, perhaps a cartoon character you dimly recognized. It lay on its side, slick with rain, its cheerful color a jarring contrast to the muted grays and greens of the desolate driveway. It looked perfectly clean, almost new, as if it had only just been placed there. What made your breath catch, though, was the way it lay. Not dropped, not scattered, but positioned with a strange, almost careful precision, facing the front door of the house. A cold, sharp shock ran through you. You knelt slowly, your boots sinking slightly into the wet gravel. You didn't touch the toy. You just stared at it, this mundane object now imbued with an unsettling, specific dread. A child's toy. Here, in this isolated, rain-soaked drive, with no children around. No other signs of family life in this rental. A small, bright yellow toy, meticulously placed between your car's tire and a puddle on the wet gravel, was a chilling final piece in a terrifying puzzle. It wasn't just an object, it was a deliberate statement, a calling card left by an unseen hand. The rhythmic shick from the basement, the slow, deliberate creaking of floorboards above, the low, persistent hum from the walls, all felt like the house itself was breathing, alive, and complicit. Your phone remained a useless black rectangle, a constant reminder of your profound isolation, and your car, a lifeless hulk, cemented your entrapment. You knelt there, boots sinking slightly into the soft, wet earth, staring at the plastic figurine. Its cheerful color, a jarring contrast to the muted grays and greens of the desolate driveway, felt like a mockery. The thought of the abandoned swing set, the distant, childlike melody, the locket with the young woman's picture, it all coalesced into a deeply disturbing pattern. This wasn't just another thing left behind. This felt like a direct, undeniable acknowledgement of your presence, and a clear, chilling indication of the nature of the unseen entities that populated this place. As you knelt, a subtle shift occurred in the air. The relentless, whispering drizzle, a constant companion since your arrival, began to fade. The drops lessened, becoming softer, more infrequent, until they ceased altogether. A profound, heavy silence descended. The drip from the eaves slowed, became sporadic, then stopped. The air felt suddenly, unnaturally still, as if the entire world had held its breath. You stood up slowly, the silence pressing in around you, heavy and thick. The fog, too, began to lift, slowly, reluctantly, like a veil being drawn back. The distant tree lines, which had been indistinct blurs, started to resolve into sharper, clearer forms, revealing the dense, dark woods that surrounded the property. The unfamiliar car, a dark, anonymous sedan, was still there, parked stealthily at the edge of the woods, its dull paint glinting faintly as the light strengthened. Your own car, slick with moisture, seemed to gleam in this new, unsettling quiet. The world was clearer now, exposed. But this clarity offered no comfort. Instead, the sudden stillness, the lack of wind, the absence of rain, felt infinitely more terrifying than the storm had ever been. The silence was not peaceful. It was expectant, watchful. Every visual detail, now unobscured by the mist, felt sharper, more profound. The way the leaves hung motionless on the branches, heavy with leftover moisture. The dark, slick trunks of the pines, standing like silent sentinels. The undisturbed mud leading from the driveway into the deeper woods. The house behind you seemed to absorb the silence, its low hum now a solitary, pervasive sound, a deep, resonant thrum that vibrated through your bones. You turned, slowly, to face it. The weathered wood, the dark windows, the front door that now felt less like a barrier and more like a stage for an unseen performance. The absence of sound from the basement scratching, or the upstairs creaking, was almost more unsettling than their presence had been. It was as if all the house's strange inhabitants had paused, listening, waiting, watching. You stood in the middle of the driveway, the small yellow toy still a vibrant, unsettling splash of color at your feet, surrounded by the overwhelming, almost painful stillness. The cold, damp air felt sharper now, biting your exposed skin. The silence was absolute, save for your own ragged breathing and the internal thrum of the house. You were no longer just a listener to ambient horror. You were an active participant in a tableau of profound stillness. What happens when the storm finally breaks and the world goes utterly silent, revealing not peace, but an even deeper, more watchful kind of calm? And what exactly does that waiting silence want you to do next? The sudden, unnerving stillness after the rain, the lifting fog revealing the sharp, dark outlines of the woods, had solidified your dread. The small yellow toy, a deliberate punctuation mark at your feet, felt less like a forgotten item and more like a taunting message. The profound, watchful silence pressed in, amplifying the low, persistent hum from the house, a deep, guttural thrum that vibrated through your bones. Your phone remained a useless black rectangle, a constant reminder of your profound isolation, and your car, a lifeless hulk, cemented your entrapment. You stood in the middle of the driveway, caught between your dead vehicle and the house that felt terrifyingly alive. The unfamiliar car, a dark, anonymous sedan, was still parked stealthily at the edge of the woods, its dull paint glinting faintly in the strengthening dawn light. Its presence felt like a silent, unwavering observation. The absence of sound from the basement scratching or the upstairs creaking was almost more unsettling than their presence had been, as if all the house's strange inhabitants had paused, listening, waiting, watching. You had to move. You couldn't stay frozen in this exposed tableau of profound stillness. The house offered no true sanctuary, but it was at least solid, offering walls between you and the unknown presences that now felt so palpable outside. With a desperate resolve, you walked slowly back towards the front door, the small yellow toy, a vivid, unsettling splash of color receding behind you. The cold, damp air felt sharper now, biting your exposed skin. Inside, the low hum of the house was a constant, unsettling presence. You moved through the living room, gathering your sparse belongings into your duffel bag, a frantic, desperate attempt to prepare for an escape you still couldn't conceive. The faded journal entry, with its desperate warning about the scratching, was a cold, brittle weight in your pocket. The image of the silent figure beyond the fence, the inexplicable doorbell chime, the strange melody, all swirled in your mind, a terrifying tapestry of events that defied explanation. As you stood by the window, peering out one last time, a new chill, unrelated to the temperature, settled over you. The rain, which had stopped, was now resuming, a soft, tentative drizzle at first, then quickly growing into a steady, persistent patter against the windows. The fog, which had momentarily lifted, began to roll back in, slowly, inexorably, swallowing the distant tree lines, turning them once more into blurred, indistinct shapes. The world outside was retreating, pulling its veil of obscurity back over the disturbing clarity of the new day. Your gaze fell upon the long, winding dirt road that led away from the house, your only apparent path to civilization. It was already beginning to blur into the encroaching mist, and then you saw it. At the very end of the driveway, where the gravel road met the dense woods, stood a weathered wooden gate. You remembered it being closed, latched, a rustic barrier at the entrance of the property. But now it was open, not broken, not forced, not lying on the ground. It was simply swung wide, resting against the fence post, a deliberate, wide-open invitation. The rain slicked its old, gray wood, making it gleam faintly in the dim light. The chain that would normally hold it shut hung limp, undisturbed, from its post. The open gate felt less like an oversight and more like a conscious act, a deliberate removal of the final barrier between this property and whatever lay beyond. A cold, sharp shock ran through you. You pressed your forehead against the cold glass of the window, your breath pluming. The low hum from the walls felt less like a mechanical resonance, and more like a whispered conspiracy. The open gate, framed by the returning fog and the steady drizzle, felt like a silent, undeniable beckoning. The wide-open gate, a silent, stark invitation at the end of the driveway, had sent a fresh wave of ice through you. It stood, brazenly ajar, against the backdrop of the returning fog and the steady, insistent patter of the rain, a deliberate removal of the final barrier. Your phone remained a useless black rectangle, a constant reminder of your profound isolation, and your car, a lifeless hulk, cemented your entrapment. The low, persistent hum from the walls of the house vibrated through your bones, a deep, guttural thrum that felt less like a mechanical resonance and more like a resonant, living pulse from the very structure itself. You were backed away from the window, heart hammering, breath pluming in the cold, damp air. The weight of all the unsettling occurrences, the attic sounds, the muddy shovel, the flickering light, the phantom footsteps, the missing key fob, the distant melody, the stranger's smile, the doorbell chime, the figure beyond the fence, the wet leaves on the doorstep, the unfamiliar car, pressed down on you, a terrifying tapestry of events that defied all logic. The absence of sound from the basement scratching, or the upstairs creaking, was almost more unsettling than their presence had been. It was as if all the house's strange inhabitants had paused, listening, waiting, watching. You knew you couldn't stay. The house offered no sanctuary, only an intensified sense of being watched, of being hunted. But the outside world, now shrouded again in mist and rain, felt equally menacing. Yet, the open gate, that silent, undeniable beckoning, seemed to offer the only path forward, however perilous. With a desperate resolve, you grabbed your duffel bag, the faded journal entry, a cold, brittle weight in your pocket, and, taking one last look at the pristine apple in the picnic basket on the kitchen counter, you moved towards the front door. You unlocked it, the click of the deadbolt echoing loudly in the sudden quiet, and stepped out onto the porch. The air was still cold, damp, and heavy, with the smell of wet earth and pine. The drizzle, a steady, chilling kiss on your exposed skin, had settled into a relentless downpour, blurring the world into an indistinct tableau of gray. The fog, thick and oppressive, had rolled back in, swallowing the distant tree lines, turning them once more into blurred, menacing shapes. Your dead car sat in the drive, a silent hulk. The unfamiliar car was still parked stealthily at the edge of the woods, a dark, anonymous shape barely visible in the encroaching mist. You began to walk, quickly now, your boots crunching on the wet gravel, a frantic, desperate pace towards the open gate. Your eyes darted from side to side, scanning the dripping evergreens, the swirling mist, searching for any sign of movement, any hint of the unseen presences that you now knew were all around you. Each step felt like a gamble into the unknown. As you neared the open gate, your gaze fell to the ground. There, leading from the gate, directly into the dense, rain-soaked woods, were fresh footprints. Not yours. Not from your boots. These were larger, deeper, impressed clearly into the soft, muddy earth, already beginning to fill with rainwater. They were the distinct imprints of heavy work boots, the same kind of tread you'd seen in the single boot print on your kitchen floor. And there was more than one. A clear, undeniable trail leading away from the open gate, directly into the thick, impenetrable darkness of the forest. The footprints were undeniable, a chilling, physical confirmation. They didn't lead away from the woods, back towards the road. They led knee-deep into them, as if someone or something had deliberately opened the gate, then walked straight into the heart of the surrounding wilderness, leaving this silent, undeniable invitation for you to follow. The rain seemed to intensify around them, each drop a tiny hammer against the fresh mud. The undeniable trail of heavy boot prints leading into the rain-soaked woods past the wide-open gate had been a clear, terrifying invitation. You hadn't taken it. A primal, instinctual terror had frozen you at the threshold of the property, staring into the impenetrable darkness of the pines, listening to the relentless downpour. To follow was to surrender to the unknown, to willingly walk into the heart of whatever malevolence lurked in those depths. Instead, with a desperate, shuddering breath, you had turned, fled back towards the house, slamming and double-locking the front door as if its flimsy wood could hold back the vast, watching silence of the forest. The low, persistent hum from the walls of the house pulsed around you, a deep, guttural thrum that vibrated through your bones. Your phone remained a useless black rectangle, a constant reminder of your profound isolation, and your car, a lifeless hulk, cemented your entrapment. The rhythmic shick from the basement, which had momentarily paused, resumed its tireless scratching, a chilling bass note to the house's internal symphony. Above, the slow, deliberate asterisk creak, pause creak, asterisk of weight shifting on old timber, started again, confirming the unseen presence above. You paced the living room, a thin, frantic line worn into the threadbare rug. The faded journal entry, with its desperate warning about the scratching, was a cold, brittle weight in your pocket. The image of the silent figure beyond the fence, the inexplicable doorbell chime, the strange melody, the stranger's smile, the wet leaves, the unfamiliar car, and now the footprints leading into the woods. It all coalesced into an overwhelming, terrifying narrative. You needed answers. You needed to understand. Your gaze fell on a small, unassuming door near the kitchen, opposite the pantry. You'd assumed it was a broom closet, or maybe just extra storage. It blended almost perfectly with the cream-painted wall, a detail you'd barely registered until now. But an instinct, a desperate, illogical pull, drew you to it. You needed to search, to find any other clue, any other whisper from the past that might illuminate this waking nightmare. With trembling hands, you reached for the tarnished brass knob. It turned, with a soft, dry squeak, a small, unremarked sound in the symphony of the house's dread. You pulled the door open. Inside was a cramped, dark utility closet, smelling faintly of stagnant water and old wood. A few dusty buckets, a rusty mop, a coil of yellowed rope. And then, you saw it. On the back wall of the closet, almost completely hidden behind a stack of old, mildewed paint cans, was a message. Not written with ink, but scratched directly into the plaster, deep and jagged, as if scored with desperate, frantic effort. The surface of the wall was gouged, flaking slightly where the plaster had been torn away. The words were uneven, uppercase, stark, and chilling, against the faded paint. They are here, watching. They want her. Your breath hitched, a cold tremor running through you. The words seemed to scream from the wall, a raw, primal warning from someone who had once stood in this very spot, equally terrified. They are here, watching. The figure beyond the fence, the unfamiliar car. They want her. The young woman in the locket? The she from the journal entry? The implications were horrifying, personal. You backed away slowly, your gaze fixed on the crude, desperate message, the faint scent of damp plaster and old fear clinging to the air. The methodical scratching from the basement seemed to intensify, a chilling accompaniment to the new, profound message. The low hum from the walls pulsed, and the quiet creaking from above returned, as if acknowledging your discovery. The message scratched into the utility closet wall, stark and desperate, had landed like a physical blow. They are here, watching. They want her. The words echoed in your mind, a raw, primal scream from someone long gone, confirming every creeping dread, every inexplicable event you had witnessed. The relentless shick from the basement intensified, a chilling bass note to the house's internal symphony, while the slow, deliberate creak, pause, creak, of weight shifting on old timber resonated from above. Beneath it all, the low, persistent hum from the walls pulsed around you, a deep, guttural thrum that vibrated through your bones, a living pulse from the very structure itself. You stumbled back from the utility closet, pressing yourself against the cold, damp wall of the kitchen, your breath catching in your throat. Your phone, that useless black rectangle, felt suddenly lighter, a desperate, illogical hope sparking within you. Maybe, just maybe, if you could get it charged, find a signal, you could reach someone, anyone. The thought was a fragile lifeline in this sea of terror. You moved towards the nearest wall outlet, near the counter where the picnic basket still sat. Its pristine apple, a grotesque symbol of misplaced normalcy. You had left your phone charger plugged into this outlet yesterday, a small, mundane detail you were absolutely certain of. It was one of those habits, the charger always ready, always waiting. Your gaze fell upon the outlet. The charger was there. The small white cube of the wall adapter was visible, but it wasn't plugged in. The prongs, meant to connect it to the electrical current, were completely disengaged from the socket, hanging loose, almost as if someone had gently, deliberately, pulled it, just enough to break the connection, then left it dangling. The thin black cable, which should have been taut and leading to the phone, was coiled loosely on the counter beside it, looking perfectly undisturbed. A cold, sharp shock ran through you, a fresh wave of ice that swept away the last vestiges of desperate hope. You stared at it, uncomprehending. Then, with a horrifying clarity, you knew, undeniably, that you had left it plugged in. You always did. This wasn't a faulty outlet or a loose connection. This was an act. Another deliberate, precise manipulation. Like the missing key fob. Like the open gate. Like the wet leaves on the doorstep, you reached out a trembling hand, your fingers brushing the cool, smooth plastic of the adapter. It felt utterly inert, completely disconnected. The realization hit you with the force of a physical blow. This wasn't random, not a coincidence. Every avenue of escape, every connection to the outside world, had been systematically, methodically severed. Your car disabled. Your phone rendered useless. And now, the very means to revive it, subtly, precisely detached. The low hum from the walls seemed to intensify, vibrating through the floorboards, up into your very bones, a resonant, knowing thrum. The incessant scratching from the basement continued its tireless rhythm, and the subtle creaking from the bedroom above resumed its slow, deliberate pace. You stood in the kitchen, surrounded by the overwhelming symphony of the house's dread, a trapped listener, utterly helpless. What kind of patient, insidious presence systematically cuts off every thread of connection? And what does it want you to do when it ensures you are completely, irrevocably alone and unable to call for help? The unplugged phone charger, a deliberate act of sabotage, had solidified your profound isolation. The rhythmic shick from the basement, the slow, deliberate creak from above, and the low, persistent hum from the walls, all pulsed around you. Your useless phone lay heavy in your pocket, a cold, smooth stone in a world suddenly devoid of connection. You were trapped, car dead, every escape route systematically severed, a subject in a terrifying narrative orchestrated by unseen hands, hours blurred into an agonizing eternity. Sleep was an impossible luxury, a concept from a life that now felt impossibly distant. You paced the living room, every shadow dancing, every creak echoing. The cold draft from the attic hatch lingered, an icy acknowledgement. You kept checking the locks, a frantic, desperate ritual, pressing your ear against the front door, listening. Only the incessant, whispering drizzle outside, and the terrifying symphony of the house within. The digital clock on your phone, stubbornly black, offered no comfort, but you knew, by the oppressive silence and the cold seeping deeper, that it was late, very late. Huddled on the sofa, clutching a thin blanket, you heard it. Not the doorbell this time. A softer sound. A faint, almost melodic 20-tees tort. 20-tees, 20-tees, tees, 20-tees, 20-tees. Validate 20-tees. 20-tees, 20-tees. A small, tapperative window panel, just above the peephole. It was light, almost playful, yet utterly deliberate, a gentle, insistent summons. Your breath caught, a small, choked sound swallowed by the house's pervasive hum. You scrambled to your feet, heart hammering. You stumbled towards the front door. Your eyes darted to the clock on the wall, dimly illuminated. 3:17 a.m. Who could possibly be there now, in the deepest part of the night? You pressed your eye to the peephole, vision blurry with fear, willing it to show you something. But the rain-streaked glass revealed only a swirling expanse of impenetrable blackness, utterly devoid of any physical presence. No silhouette, no discernible shape, just the endless, dark void. The porch light was off. No engine idling, no indication that anything human was out there. Nothing but the endless, heavy black. You backed away slowly, hands pressed against your mouth, stifling a whimper. The gentle taps had been an unexpected, chilling act, a subtle intrusion. It felt like a direct, undeniable challenge, a patient, taunting signal. The profound darkness outside, coupled with the chilling absence of any visible figure, left you reeling. Was it a trick of your exhausted mind, projecting sinister intent onto an innocent sound? Or had something truly been there, something unseen, something patient, tapping not to be let in, but simply to remind you that it was waiting, watching, knowing you were on the other side? What happens when the only thing you can see through your peephole is the darkness itself, and what does it truly mean when the deepest part of the night delivers such a silent, yet profoundly unsettling knock? The soft, insistent tap against the glass of the front door, followed by the impenetrable darkness through the peephole, had frozen you in a state of rigid terror. It was 3:17 a.m., and the deep, silent void outside your house felt not empty, but profoundly, terrifyingly occupied. The low, persistent hum from the walls pulsed around you, a deep, guttural thrum that vibrated through your bones. The rhythmic is beat, shick, shick from the basement, and the slow, deliberate asterisk creak, pause, creak asterisk from above, continued their relentless, unsettling symphony. But now they were background noise, utterly overshadowed by the immediate, overwhelming dread pressing against the other side of the door. You stood there, pressed against the cold wood of the entryway wall, your breath catching in your throat, your heart hammering a frantic, desperate rhythm against your ribs. Every rational thought had evaporated, leaving only a primal, unyielding fear. The rain, a steady, whispering drizzle, continued its relentless fall outside, blurring the world into an indistinct tableau of gray, but it felt distant, secondary. Your useless phone lay heavy in your pocket, a cold, smooth stone in a world suddenly devoid of connection. Your car, a lifeless hulk, cemented your entrapment. You were utterly, completely alone, and something was waiting, minutes stretched into an eternity. You stared at the dark rectangle of the peephole, willing a shape to appear, a form to materialize in the swirling mist, anything that would confirm or deny the unseen presence. But there was nothing, only the heavy, watchful silence, pressing in, cold and absolute. The air in the hallway was already damp and cool, but a new chill, sharper, more defined, began to emanate from the front door itself, seeping through the cracks and seams. It was a cold that felt unnatural, deep, almost personal, and then you heard it. So faint, so subtle, you almost dismissed it as a trick of your overtaxed senses, a phantom born of exhaustion and terror. But it was there. A breath, not the sigh of the wind, or the gentle rustle of leaves. This was distinct, shallow, slow, a soft, almost inaudible HNNNH, a muted, steady intake and exhalation of air, coming from directly outside the front door, just on the other side of the wood. It was incredibly close, impossibly intimate, as if someone stood inches away, their face pressed against the thick barrier that separated you. The sound carried a faint, cold moisture, a suggestion of frigid air being drawn in, then released, barely audible above the persistent drizzle. You froze, every muscle rigid. Your eyes widened, fixed on the peephole, though you knew it showed nothing. The cold breath, so close, so undeniably present, seemed to vibrate through the very wood of the door, a chilling, visceral confirmation of an unseen, terrifying proximity. It was steady, unhurried, a slow, deliberate rhythm that felt profoundly unsettling. It wasn't frantic, not desperate. It was calm, patient, waiting. Your heart hammered, a frantic drumbeat against the overwhelming reality of that sound. The thought of something so close, so undeniably alive, yet completely invisible and silent save for its quiet breath, was almost unbearable. The door, which had felt like your last bastion of defense, now felt thin, fragile, a mere sheet of wood separating you from whatever inhuman presence breathed so patiently on its other side. The low hum of the house, the scratching, the creaking, all faded into the background, overwhelmed by the terrifying intimacy of that single shallow breath. You stood there trembling, knowing that your personal space, your very sense of self, was no longer your own. How do you protect yourself when the threat is so close, so intimate, so profoundly unseen, and what does it truly want when it simply stands outside your door, breathing, knowing you are listening, knowing you are here? The soft, shallow asterisk, HNNNH asterisk of the breath on the other side of the door, had been the ultimate violation, a chilling confirmation of a proximate, unseen presence. It was 3:17 a.m., and the deep, silent void outside your house felt not empty, but profoundly, terrifyingly occupied. You had stumbled back from the door, pressing yourself against the cold wood of the entryway wall, your breath catching in your throat, your heart hammering a frantic, desperate rhythm against your ribs. Every rational thought had evaporated, leaving only a primal, unyielding fear. The rain, a steady, whispering drizzle, continued its relentless fall outside, blurring the world into an indistinct tableau of gray, but it felt distant, secondary. Your useless phone lay heavy in your pocket, a cold, smooth stone in a world suddenly devoid of connection. Your car, a lifeless hulk, cemented your entrapment. You were utterly, completely alone, and something had been waiting, breathing. Minutes stretched into an eternity. You stared at the dark rectangle of the peephole, willing a shape to appear, a form to materialize in the swirling mist, anything that would confirm or deny the unseen presence. But there was nothing, only the heavy, watchful silence pressing in, cold and absolute. The low, persistent hum from the walls pulsed around you, a deep, guttural thrum that vibrated through your bones, a living pulse from the very structure itself. The rhythmic shick, shick from the basement, and the slow, deliberate creak, pause creak, from above, continued their relentless, unsettling symphony, but now they were background noise, utterly overshadowed by the immediate, overwhelming dread of what lay just beyond the front door. You retreated slowly to the living room, a fragile lamp casting small, dancing shadows. Sleep remained an impossible luxury, a concept from a life that now felt impossibly distant. Every creak of old timber, every sigh of wind, every drip from the eaves pulled your nerves tighter. The cold draft from the attic hatch lingered, an icy acknowledgement. The scratched message on the utility closet wall. They are here, watching. They want her. Burned in your mind, a desperate, decades-old warning echoing with terrifying clarity. Then, a new sensory detail began to emerge, cutting through the general mustiness of the old house, distinct and profoundly unsettling. A smell. The strong, undeniable scent of damp earth. It wasn't merely the general dampness that permeated the air from the ceaseless rain. This was a deeper, richer, more primal scent, like freshly turned soil, or the heavy, humid aroma of a deep, dark cavern. It seemed to waft from within the house itself, a cold, earthy tang that prickled your nostrils, making your breath catch. It felt out of place, utterly alien to the enclosed space, a smell that belonged to the outside, to the forest floor, to grave soil. You stood there, breathing shallowly, your heart hammering, trying to locate the source. The smell seemed strongest near the kitchen, but not directly from the pantry or the utility closet. It felt deeper, lower, resonating with the very floorboards. You moved slowly, carefully, towards the kitchen, your footsteps unnaturally loud on the wooden floor. The low hum from the walls seemed to intensify as you walked, a deep, resonant thrum that vibrated through your bones, a chilling accompaniment to the growing dread. As you neared the kitchen, the scent of damp earth became overpowering, thick and heavy, as if the ground itself had seeped into the very air. You could taste it almost, a metallic mineral tang on your tongue. Your eyes scanned the floor, the walls, searching for any sign of a leak, any damp patch that might explain its sudden, profound intensity. But everything looked dry, intact. Yet the smell was undeniably there, strong, fresh, visceral, clinging to the air around you. The overwhelming scent of damp earth, thick and primal, filled the kitchen, radiating from the basement door where the methodical shick had subsided to an unsettling silence. Above, the slow, deliberate creak, pause creak, of weight shifting on old timber resonated. Beneath it all, the low, persistent hum from the walls pulsed around you, a deep, guttural thrum that vibrated through your bones, a living pulse from the very structure itself. The unplugged phone charger, a deliberate act of sabotage, confirmed your profound isolation. Your useless phone lay heavy in your pocket, and your car, a lifeless hulk, cemented your entrapment. The scratched message on the utility closet wall. "They are here, watching. They want her," burned in your mind. A desperate, decades-old warning echoing with terrifying clarity. You stood in the kitchen, paralyzed by the competing terrors, until the suffocating scent of fresh earth, cold and mineral, became unbearable. It felt as though the very ground beneath the house had opened, its presence seeping into every corner. This was it. You couldn't stay. To remain was to surrender. With a desperate, shuddering breath, you grabbed your duffel bag, the faded journal entry, a cold, brittle weight in your pocket. You glanced at the picnic basket, its pristine apple, a grotesque symbol of false normalcy, and left it on the counter. You moved swiftly, quietly, towards the front door. The house's hum intensified, a vibrating warning. The rain, a steady drizzle, accompanied your frantic exit. You fumbled with the locks, turning them with trembling hands, and pulled the door open, the sudden rush of cold, damp air a shock against your face. The fog had thinned slightly, a gray, watery illumination revealing the world in muted tones, but the air still tasted of rain and damp pine. You half ran across the wet gravel driveway towards your car, a silent hulk in the dim light. The unfamiliar sedan was still parked stealthily at the edge of the woods, a dark, anonymous shape barely visible through the lingering mist, its presence a constant, chilling reminder of unseen eyes. You ripped open your car door, the electronic chirp curse in time surprisingly weak. You slid into the driver's seat, the cold plastic and worn fabric a small, familiar comfort. Your car keys, which you'd retrieved from your pocket in a moment of desperation, felt sharp and cold in your trembling hand. You inserted the physical key into the ignition. Turned it. The engine sputtered, a weak, desperate cough, then a grinding whir-wheeze, and then, almost miraculously, it caught. It wasn't a smooth, confident roar. It was a rough, protesting rumble, a shaky, uneven idle that vibrated through the steering wheel, sounding as if it could die at any second. But it was running. Against all odds, without the fob, the engine groaned to life, the unexpected sound a burst of raw, exhilarating hope. You slammed the door shut, locking it with a desperate click. The interior lights flickered weakly, then held steady. You jammed the gear into reverse, your foot heavy on the pedal. The tires spun on the wet gravel for a moment, then caught, and the car lurched backward. You swung it around, narrowly missing your old parking spot, and accelerated down the long, winding dirt road, gravel spraying behind you. The car shuddered, coughed, but it moved. The lights of the rental house, a pale, sickly yellow from the single lamp you'd left on, began to recede into the deepening gloom of the woods. You gripped the steering wheel, your knuckles white, forcing yourself to focus on the treacherous, winding path ahead, but your eyes kept darting to the rearview mirror. The house grew smaller, swallowed by the mist and the dark outlines of the pines. And then, for a split second, in the center of the rearview mirror, as the car rounded a bend, and the house was almost entirely obscured, you saw it. Not the silent figure from the fence. The steady drizzle had given way to a thick, oppressive fog by late afternoon, pressing against the windows like a damp, gray blanket. The air inside the rental felt colder now, despite the heating, and the silence, after the phantom footsteps, was a constant, nerve-wracking presence. You'd tried to dismiss it all as an overactive imagination fueled by isolation, but the image of that muddy shovel, and the insistent, flickering light in the kitchen, kept returning. You knew, deep down, that you needed to leave. Tonight, packing was a hurried affair. each item tossed into your duffel bag with a growing sense of urgency. The car keys felt like a lifeline, a tangible link to escape. The prospect of driving in this heavy fog was daunting, but the thought of another night in that house, alone with its unsettling whispers and unseen movements, was far worse. You grabbed your phone, the faint glow of the screen, a small comfort against the encroaching gloom. The clock read 4:17 p.m. Not quite dark, but the fog made it feel like deep twilight. You locked the front door behind you, the click of the deadbolt surprisingly loud in the thick, damp air. The fog was truly dense now, swallowing the trees at the edge of the property, turning the familiar outlines of the house into soft, indistinct shapes. You walked quickly across the gravel driveway, your footsteps muffled by the moisture. The air was heavy, carrying the scent of wet earth and decaying leaves, cool against your face. As you approached your car, a dark shape barely visible a few yards ahead, you fumbled for your keys. The cold metal felt sharp in your hand. You unlocked the doors, the faint electronic chirp swallowed almost immediately by the fog. You slid into the driver's seat, the familiar scent of your car, a momentary relief. You put the key in the ignition, turned it. The engine sputtered. A single, weak cough, then silence. Nothing. Your breath hitched. You tried again, turning the key, feeling the cold plastic beneath your fingers. The engine turned over, a sluggish grinding sound, but it refused to catch. It just sputtered, a pathetic, dying gasp, then faded. You tried a third time, holding the key, willing it to ignite, to roar to life. Whir, sputter, wheeze, asterisk then, a final, hollow click. Nothing. The dashboard lights dimmed, then went out completely. Panic, cold and sharp, pierced through the dull ache of unease. You sat there, hands gripping the steering wheel, staring at the dead dashboard. The silence of the car was absolute, a stark contrast to the soft, enveloping hiss of the fog outside. You were stranded. Alone. The thought was a physical blow. You tried the ignition again, but now there was only a series of faint, desperate clicks. The battery was clearly dead. You reached for your phone, but the screen remained stubbornly black. Dead. Or maybe just out of range. The deep woods known for spotty service. A slow dread began to seep into your bones. The house, barely visible through the swirling mist behind you, seemed to loom larger, darker, no longer a place of temporary shelter but a trap. You looked out into the thick, gray curtain of fog, trying to see the winding dirt road, but it was completely obscured. What do you do when the only way out fails, and the very air around you feels like it's holding you captive? The dead engine and the silent phone had slammed you back into the reality of your predicament. The car, once a symbol of freedom, now felt like a metal coffin, cold and powerless. Outside, the fog pressed in, thick and suffocating, muffling every sound beyond the faint, persistent drizzle that kissed the windshield. The house, barely a shadow in the swirling gray, loomed behind you, no longer a refuge, but a source of gnawing dread. You tried the ignition again, a futile twist of the key, but only the hollow click of a completely drained battery answered. Your breath plumed white in the cold air inside the car. Staying here wasn't an option. Night would fall soon, and the thought of being trapped in the dark car with the unsettling house just yards away was unbearable. You could walk back to the rental, but the idea of entering that place again, alone, with its flickering lights and phantom footsteps, made your skin crawl. No, the only way was forward. Down the road. You pushed open the car door, the sound, a surprisingly loud creak asterisk in the oppressive quiet. The damp air hit your face, heavy and cold, carrying the earthy smell of wet pine needles and decaying leaves. The gravel crunched under your boots as you stepped out, the fog immediately swallowing you, reducing visibility to just a few feet. The long, winding dirt road, your only path out, was completely lost in the gray expanse. You held your phone, still stubbornly dark, more as a talisman than a tool. You started walking, slowly, cautiously, your senses on high alert. Each step felt like a gamble into the unknown. The dense trees on either side of the road were just indistinct blurs, their usual rustle of leaves muted by the fog. You focused on the faint indentations of old tire tracks in the mud, hoping they would lead you to something, anything. Just as doubt began to claw at your resolve, a faint diffuse glow appeared in the distance, cutting through the fog like a beacon. Headlights. A surge of relief, sharp and overwhelming, washed over you. Help was coming. Someone else was out here. You instinctively waved, though you knew they couldn't possibly see you through the dense mist. The light grew stronger, slowly, steadily, illuminating the swirling fog in front of it. You could hear the faint rumble of an engine now, a low thrum that grew louder with each passing moment. But as the lights drew closer, something felt off. They weren't moving with the steady, purposeful speed of a vehicle just passing through. They were slow, almost hesitant, their beam cutting through the fog with an unnatural deliberateness. They seemed to pause, then inch forward again, as if searching. And they weren't staying on the road. The angle of the light shifted, pointing slightly off to the side, towards the dense thicket of pines that lined the rental property. A cold prickle replaced the warmth of relief. The car was turning, very slowly, seeming to line the property. Not onto the main driveway, but off to the side, where no driveway existed. The rumble of the engine grew closer, then subsided, replaced by the crunch of tires on damp earth, as the vehicle appeared to pull into the woods itself. The beam of the headlights, now angled sharply, was completely swallowed by the dense fog and the dark trees. The engine sound faded, leaving only the endless, gentle patter of the drizzle. You stood there, frozen, staring into the impenetrable gray where the lights had vanished. Was that help? Or had you just welcomed something else into this isolated place? The cold, heavy fog had swallowed the phantom headlights, leaving you utterly alone, stranded between the dead car and the unsettling house. There was no choice but to return. The dread of stepping back inside was a tangible weight, but the alternative, spending the night shivering in the car or lost in the impenetrable mist, was unthinkable. You fumbled with the keys again, the metal cold and slick in your trembling hand, and let yourself back into the rental. The click of the lock behind you felt less like security and more like a final sealing of your fate. The air inside was colder than you remembered, carrying the faint, persistent smell of damp wood and something else, something subtly metallic and earthy, almost like the mud on the shovel. The house felt heavier now, its silence an oppressive blanket. Your phone, a useless black rectangle, was tucked into your pocket, a constant reminder of your isolation. You needed a flashlight, something, anything, to pierce the encroaching twilight that seeped through the windows. The living room, which had offered brief comfort earlier, now felt cavernous and watchful. You moved towards the kitchen, remembering the flickering light, hoping to find a power bank, a battery, anything that might jumpstart your dead electronics, or, at least, illuminate the deepening gloom. The track lights, which had behaved erratically earlier, now glowed with an unwavering, almost defiant brightness, making the sudden quiet of the house feel even more pronounced. You scanned the counters, the drawers, a desperate search for anything practical. Your eyes fell on a narrow, unassuming door, tucked beside the refrigerator, painted the same muted cream as the walls. You'd seen it before, just assumed it was a utility cupboard, perhaps for cleaning supplies, and had never given it a second thought. But now, as you looked, You noticed something wasn't quite right. It wasn't perfectly flush with the wall. A thin, almost imperceptible sliver of darkness showed along its edge, as if it were very slightly ajar. A cold knot tightened in your stomach. You were certain you had never opened it. You were equally certain, with the kind of certainty that only comes when you feel a primal alarm, that you had never seen it like this. You slowly walked towards it, your footsteps unnaturally loud on the linoleum. The faint, earthy smell in the air seemed stronger here, emanating from the crack. You reached out a hesitant hand, your fingers brushing the cool wood of the door. With a soft, almost inaudible creak, it opened further under your touch, revealing a small, shallow pantry. It wasn't full of food as you might expect. Instead, it was mostly empty, save for a few forgotten items: a dusty, half-empty jar of pickles, a single, mismatched oven mitt, and something else, pushed almost to the very back. A small, tarnished silver locket, glinting dully in the light, resting on a neatly folded, surprisingly clean piece of dark cloth. The sight of it, so personal, so out of place in a rental pantry, sent a fresh wave of unease through you. It was clearly not something meant for guests. Who would leave something like that behind? And why, after days in this house, was this door, which you'd never noticed was unlocked, now open just enough for you to see it? It makes you wonder how many other overlooked corners of this house secretly hold similar quiet mysteries, just waiting for the opportune moment, or the right set of circumstances, to reveal themselves. The small, slightly ajar pantry door and the forgotten silver locket within held you captive. Your fingers brushed the cool metal of the locket, not daring to pick it up, but feeling its unexpected weight, and the undeniable sense of someone else's history it carried. The air around you, previously filled with the faint, earthy smell, now seemed to pulse with a quieter, more intimate kind of dread. The kitchen lights, so bright and insistent, felt like a spotlight on your vulnerability, failing to truly illuminate the strange things happening in this house. The drizzle outside, a steady, persistent murmur against the window panes, felt miles away, detached from the sudden, sharp reality of your situation. You closed the pantry door slowly, the soft click of the latch echoing in the heavy silence. Your eyes, now hyper-aware, scanned the kitchen, searching for any other anomaly, any other detail that might have previously escaped your notice. The spotless counters, the tidy stove, the well-worn but clean linoleum floor. Everything seemed perfectly in place, a picture of domestic order that felt deeply unsettling given the events of the last day. The car was dead outside, your phone was useless, and the fog was pressing in. You were trapped, and this house was revealing its secrets one unsettling piece at a time. You took a tentative step back, away from the pantry towards the living room. Your gaze was still sweeping the floor, an instinctive need to confirm that nothing else was out of place. And that's when you saw it. Just to the left of where you had been standing, almost directly in front of the pantry door, was a single, distinct wet bootprint. It was stark against the clean linoleum, a clear impression of a ridged sole, the outline of mud and water dark and fresh. It wasn't a smear or a smudge or a faint trace. It was a complete, unmistakable bootprint, as if someone had stood there, dripping wet, for a moment, then lifted their foot clean away. Only one. No other prints led to it, or away from it. Just this solitary, chilling mark on your kitchen floor. Your breath hitched, a cold tremor running through you. The sight of it felt like a punch to the gut, a visceral confirmation of an unwelcome presence. This wasn't a phantom sound, or a flickering light. This was a physical, undeniable sign that someone or something had been here, inside the house, in the kitchen, not long ago. and they had been wet. From the rain, from the fog, from the very conditions that were now trapping you. You knelt down, your fingers hovering inches above the print, not wanting to disturb it, yet needing to feel its reality. The moisture had just started to evaporate, leaving a darker stain on the light floor. The tread pattern was clear, heavy, the kind you might see on a work boot. You looked up, quickly, frantically, towards the back door, then the front. Both were locked. You had locked them yourself. How? When? The rain had been falling since yesterday. Had someone entered through the back, left the shovel, then come inside? Had they been here while you were sleeping? While you were making toast? The absolute certainty of your locks, of your isolation, crumbled around you. This single wet boot print wasn't just a physical trace. It was an invasion, a violation of your sense of security that felt profoundly personal. You stood there, staring at the print, the rain outside now a gentle whisper, and you wonder how much of what we call home is merely an illusion, easily breached, easily marked by something unseen. The cold, the fog, the dead car. They had solidified your resolve. Walking was the only option, a desperate gamble against the encroaching night. You'd left the car behind, a silent hulk swallowed by the thickening fog, its dark silhouette barely visible a few yards back. The memory of those mysterious headlights disappearing into the woods by the rental property was a fresh, unsettling twist in your gut, amplifying the chilling sense of isolation that clung to you like the damp air itself, compounded by the persistent questions about the house. Now, your only path was the long, winding dirt road, stretching endlessly into the gray, rain-soaked unknown. Each step was a commitment, a leap of faith that this lonely stretch of gravel would eventually lead to something, anything, resembling help. The drizzle was a constant, fine mist on your face, chilling you to the bone despite the inadequate protection of your jacket. Your hair was beginning to feel heavy with moisture, and the chill was starting to seep deep into your muscles. Each footstep on the slick, muddy gravel was a small, muted splash, the sound amplified in the suffocating quiet that the fog imposed. Your phone remained a dead weight in your pocket, its stubbornly black screen, a constant, cruel reminder of how truly alone and cut off you were. You kept pushing forward, forcing your legs to move, hoping for a sign, any sign, of human habitation, a distant glimmer of warmth or safety that wasn't just another trick of this malevolent environment. Then, through the heavy curtain of fog, a vision of relief appeared, a faint, yellowish haze, impossibly far down the road, yet unmistakably artificial, a streetlight, or maybe a glowing sign from some forgotten roadside business. Whatever it was light. It was a tangible link to civilization, a promise of warmth and connection. A surge of desperate hope, sharp and almost painful, shot through you, momentarily eclipsing the fatigue and the persistent dread. Your pace quickened, each hurried step an act of defiance against the oppressive gloom that had surrounded you for what felt like an eternity. As you walked, the air began to shift subtly. The predominant, faint, earthy smell of wet pine and decaying leaves gradually gave way to something else. A sharper, almost metallic tang, hints of gasoline, and the faint, sweet decay of old asphalt. You were definitely getting closer. The yellowish glow strengthened, slowly resolving itself from a hazy blob into the distinct, if still blurry, outline of a solitary, old-fashioned streetlight, its single bulb casting a weak, diffuse circle of light against the swirling mist. Beneath its pale illumination, you could just make out the low, squat shape of a building, a gas station, its faded sign barely readable through the thickening haze. Salvation. A payphone, perhaps, or at least a warm, dry place to wait. You picked up your pace one final time, your boots squelching in the deepening mud, the sound of your own anxious breathing loud in your ears. The barely audible hum of the fluorescent light, which had been a distant whisper moments ago, now grew into a distinct, buzzing drone, a symphony of reassuring modernity that promised to cut through the isolation. As you finally stepped into the warm, albeit watery and distorted pool of light beneath the lamp, you stopped abruptly, your breath caught, freezing in your throat, a sudden, inexplicable alarm seizing you. Standing directly beneath the streetlight, at the very edge of the light's uncertain reach, was a shadow. It wasn't a shadow cast by the gas station building, or a tree, or any of the dilapidated equipment scattered around. This was a deeper, more defined shape, almost like a person, obscured by the shifting tendrils of fog and the trick of the light itself, but distinctly, undeniably present. The stark silhouette beneath the lonely streetlight had seized you, freezing you in the oppressive embrace of the fog. Your breath plumed in the cold air, your gaze locked on that indistinct shape where the pale, sickly yellow light fought against the encroaching darkness. It wasn't moving. It was just there, a deeper shadow within the shadows, obscured by the swirling tendrils of mist and the distorting glow of the lamp. Every instinct screamed at you to run, but your feet felt rooted to the damp, muddy gravel. You stood for a long moment, chest heaving, listening intently over the gentle, persistent hiss of the drizzle. There was no sound from the shadow, no rustle, no movement, just the low, insistent hum of the fluorescent tube overhead, a sound that usually suggested safety and convenience, but now felt utterly alien and unsettling in this desolate landscape. You blinked, hard, trying to clear the moisture from your eyes, to pierce the deception of the fog. Was it a discarded object? A signpost? A trick of your exhausted, wired mind? As you focused, willing the shape to resolve itself, it seemed to subtly diffuse, to soften at the edges, slowly dissolving back into the swirling gray that surrounded it, until it was just nothing. The space beneath the light was empty, save for the mist. A shaky breath escaped your lips, a cold release of tension that left you trembling. Your mind immediately tried to rationalize it. A trick of the light, a particularly dense pocket of fog, a phantom born of exhaustion and dread. Whatever it was gone. The relief was a brief, fragile thing, quickly overshadowed by the profound loneliness of the place. The gas station building ahead looked like a squat, abandoned shell, its windows dark, its paint peeling. No bright, welcoming lights, no hum of activity. Just a quiet, forlorn structure, swallowed by the mist. You forced your legs to move again, each step a reluctant commitment to this strange, silent outpost. The crunch of gravel under your boots was surprisingly loud, followed by the soft squelch of mud. The air still carried that faint, metallic tang, mingling with the earthy smell of wet pine. As you approached the building, you noticed the faded, almost illegible sign above what would have been the main entrance. Maple Creek Gas and Grub, closed. The word closed felt like a pronouncement, a final, unyielding wall between you and any hope of immediate help. You circled the small, dilapidated structure, peering through the grimy windows, but saw nothing but dusty shelves and overturned chairs. No working payphone, no sign of life, just a lingering sense of abandonment, of time having stood still here for years. You rounded the far corner, where the building met a patch of overgrown muddy grass that led directly into the dense, rain-soaked woods. And that's when you saw it. Tucked away in the corner, half hidden by a weeping willow whose branches drooped heavy with rain, was an old swing set. Its metal frame was rusted, the paint long gone, but the two plastic swings still hung from their chains, dark and slick with moisture. One of them, the smaller faded red one, was swaying gently, almost imperceptibly, in the barely there breeze, as if it had just been vacated. The chains gave off a faint, high-pitched creak, a tiny, plaintive sound that felt impossibly loud in the overwhelming silence. The sight of it, a relic of childhood play, felt utterly out of place, chillingly incongruous in this desolate, forgotten corner. There were no houses nearby, no other signs of children ever having been here. Who would put a swing set at an abandoned gas station in the middle of nowhere? And why was that one swing still swaying, a silent, rhythmic pulse against the backdrop of the drizzle? The cold, damp air seemed to press down on you, and you wondered if places truly held echoes, not just of events, but of the very people who once breathed life into them.